Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Before we kick off today, we've got a few housekeeping issues to get through. We're still having IT issues at this end. We've spoken to our IT and they're trying to come up with a solution. We are managing to toggle off our phones though, so we can get documents. So you might see us playing with our kit at various points as well. So just so you know what we're doing, but hopefully we can get it sorted. We've had now electronic copies of all of the openings. We've got the opening from Sutherland and Mr. Morehouse for the PCAA. They're downloaded to my laptop as well. I've preempted the issues this morning, thankfully. And I do have a paper copy of the PCAA one as well. The Balper parking evidence issue, I don't know if they're not is he online? Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Mr.
I am online.
Yeah, okay. We obviously had a discussion about that as promised last night in terms of the evidence. As with the Greenbelt and Highways split, we're going to do a combined note and actually include everything in that one note together. We'll be sticking with the timetable in terms of the Greenbelt and the Highways issues as best we can. Mr. Young, did you want to say about the Balper evidence?
Oh, morning, Mr. Renshaw.
Good morning.
Yeah. Well, we listened very carefully to what you had to say yesterday, and we did discuss the matter yesterday evening as well. However, our position does remain the same as we previously set out, and that we are interested only to hear about the impact of this specific scheme. And given that there are no meaningful changes proposed to the staff parking arrangements as part of this proposed development before us, accordingly, we do not want to hear evidence on matters relating to the location of where the staff parking shouldn't be. Of course, you're entitled to call evidence to rebut the appellant's argument that there are no preferable alternative sites to extending the Silver Zone car park, and we invite you to come along and give that evidence. Now, in terms of the timetabling issues Ms. Searson just touched upon, we will set those out. I think that is pretty much as we discussed yesterday. Issues relating to parking demand, off-site highway work, sustainable travel will all be dealt with in that Highways Week. And those who wish to talk about alternative parking sites and alternative parking arrangements on the basis that they would have a lesser impact on the Greenbelt, and I'm thinking particularly there about Balper and Ms. Sutherland, then this will need to be done through the Greenbelt sessions. And as I said, we will confirm that all in a note later. Does anybody want to say anything more on that matter? No? Okay.
Well, yes, thank you for your advice. I hear what you say, and we will take note of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In terms of climate change and the very recent evidence, we set obviously the deadline yesterday for the 13th of August. Mr. Ware, did you want to discuss about formatting?
Yes, thanks. I was thinking about this last night, and obviously we've got proofs of evidence in from all parties, I think, on the matter of climate change. Obviously, we recognise, as we said yesterday, there will be updated evidence on climate change, and we set the deadline of 13th of August. But it then occurred to me that there's quite a bit of potential for confusion in my simple brain as to which evidence we're all looking at. So I've got the first set of evidence. I'm doubtless going to be receiving a second set of evidence from the parties. And I'm not particular about how you tell me, but in some way I need to know what in the original evidence has been deleted and superseded. I'd rather not do it by yet another piece of paper saying ignore paragraphs X, Y, Z. So my suggestion would be that when you submit your new climate change evidence, could you also resubmit version 1 of your evidence with the appropriate bits knocked out in red? Does that make sense? So I'd have the original one that I've already got with deletions in it, clearly identified. You wouldn't need to say where I should be looking for the new evidence, but simply version 1 again, crossed out in red as appropriate, and version 2, which obviously I'll read. I mean, if anybody wants to do it in a different way, I'm quite easy about that. But what I don't want is version 1, as it were, a list of exclusions, and then version 2. If anybody wants to resubmit the whole thing, again, I'm quite easy about it, but I think the point's fairly obvious. We all need to know how we're going to deal with it. Yes?
So just to be clear, you're talking about a track changes version of the original evidence and a clean copy of the new evidence. Would that be right?
Yes, I should have said track changes. That's probably the easiest way of doing it. So I have the original evidence in with track changes, deletions, and I have the new evidence in, obviously, clean. That's my preference, but if anybody wants to do it a different way, I'm not going to be too precious about it. But it does need to be clearly identified, because I've had experiences elsewhere where it's been quite confusing for everybody concerned, knowing which version of the documents we're dealing with. Okay.
Okay. Yesterday, Mr. Sutherland, you indicated that extra evidence would be forthcoming. We've not seen that yet, notwithstanding IT issues. I just wondered where you were with that.
Good morning. Yes, that evidence should be with you. I'm sorry, it was supposed to be with you yesterday afternoon. Unfortunately, I still don't have it back from my typing port, but I will hope to have it today for you. Okay,
if you can just advise us when that's been submitted, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you. Today we have got witnesses from, we've got opening statements, the remaining ones from yesterday, and then we've got the witnesses for the PCAA. Obviously they'll be under cross-examination at some point by Mr. Humphreys. I think the timings for those, sir, were quite short. Can you just advise how you intend to do that?
Yeah, sorry. Stereo. Madam, they are quite short. Although the witnesses today are called by PCAA, they are, for the most part, I think with one exception, a councillor, local residents. The cross-examinations will be short. One of the witnesses does mention 2 or 3 documents that I might just then ask him about the documents he mentioned. I submitted a list that had 3 documents on it. I think I mentioned to Mr. Morehouse, I think I probably only need to ask about 2 of them. But they're all short. All these cross-examinations are really pretty short.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And then we've got some local general residents. As our note indicated, we were aiming to split parties into support and object, but because of timings, etc., we're unable to accommodate that. So we may have some people in support of the scheme, we may have some people in objecting. Obviously, putting questions to those from relevant advocates as well. I suspect there might not be many questions, but so I'll assume not, unless you flag to me. I think that's probably the easiest and swiftest way, and that'll happen. That'll be the process for the rest of the week. Okay. And then just in terms of layout, because there's quite a lot of witnesses and local residents, we're going to actually sit them at the end of the horseshoe, just to make things a little less chaotic and hopefully a bit smoother and less sort of running around. So I trust that's okay. There's lots of nods around the room, so that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, and I have been given a list of 3 core documents for cross-examination, as Mr. Humphries has just said. I trust everyone else has had that list.
We didn't circulate them to everyone. You have a copy, I have a copy, and Mr. Morehouse has a copy. More than happy to, but it seemed to us that those were the only people that really needed to be able to access the documents.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, if anyone else wants to be able to access them, yeah.
If Mr. Taylor wants one,
I'm sure we'll be able to follow along.
Yeah, there's literally only 3 on there, I think, so, yeah.
It's 2 documents.
Oh, is it 2? The paper list does.
No, it has 3. I think on reflection there are only 2 I need to ask.
Okay, excellent.
That's a question about.
Okay, are there any other sort of housekeeping or procedural matters to discuss this morning before we go into openings? Mr. Morehouse.
I was just going to say that I understand my request that when we finish the opening statements that we can have a short break,
yes,
please, to just explain to the witnesses what the procedure is from their point of view. I've not had that opportunity yet, and I can see that that's been done.
Absolutely fine. And if the witnesses have any questions about procedure, we're happy to assist as well. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okie dokie then. Well, without any more further ado, so we'll start with Ms. Sutherland's opening, please.
Good morning, everybody. I act for Mr. Pearce, one of the Rule 6 parties in this inquiry. I'm here to raise significant concern about the way in which BAL have carried out the sequential assessment of available alternative sites in relation to the parking proposals included in the proposed scheme. My client has provided off-airport parking provision for in excess of 20 years lawfully and has made an application for an airport park and ride provision on the A370 near Hewish. It's my position, and having worked with a range of off-site airport car parkers for an extended period of time, I have significant evidence to back my view. Sarah, ma'am, that's the evidence that I'm talking about that unfortunately we didn't manage to get to yesterday afternoon. There is a significant shortfall in airport parking provision, which is being met by off-airport car parking. This has not been fully analysed or considered by either the council or the airport in assessing this appeal application. Key to this lack of assessment is a failure to provide any form of evidence in relation to the existing OACP provision and the rural employment and economic benefit that they bring to the local community. Whether this appeal succeeds or not, the airport has an ongoing parking need that is not currently being met by their site and which, on their own admission, is going to increase significantly and will increase further should this appeal be allowed. The suggestion that the only way in which airport parking can be delivered is on the airport site is contradictory to the experience of all other international airports in the UK, where park and ride facilities are commonly provided to ensure sustainable transport strategies are supported and customers obtain a wider range of parking options. We all know that a large proportion of the airport's income is derived from parking, and that it is in their interest to have continued control over all parking serving the airport. However, that is no reason why OACP cannot be successful and sustainable, creating a provision that supports the financial benefits to the local rural economy and the prevention of a huge number of vehicular movements travelling onwards through the local villages on small and unsuitable roads to park in the Greenbelt. Accordingly, I'm challenging the airport's sequential assessment and the assessed need for parking arising from the existing and proposed operation of the airport. The alternative parking application has been proposed to meet the existing needs of the airport for more car parking to meet the approved growth in airport passengers. The site proposes a parking provision similar to that provided in the airport's silver zone, where customers drive to site, are provided with valet parking, and electric shuttle buses will then take them onwards to the airport. The airport is in the Greenbelt, and whilst it is accepted that consent is already in place for the airport to expand beyond its existing operating capacity, this application to expand provision further means that a comprehensive review of airport parking provision is necessary. The Council have accepted that at present they cannot see how any off-airport car parking provision can be approved, given the requirements of the airport ASAS and the need for any OACP to address and enhance sustainable travel modes. Despite knowing that there is a significant need for additional parking to serve the airport, due to the airport's failure to implement the sustainable travel plans originally approved, the Council has determined by way of policy that the only way in which OACP can be delivered is by way of Policy DM30. Policy DM30 requires any parking to be associated with overnight accommodation. In other words, you must propose a hotel or bed and breakfast accommodation and have parking associated with that. When you couple this with the Council's planning enforcement policy, that any overnight parking provided is only lawful where the occupier is still present, this creates a monopoly for the airport and prevents any other competitive OACP. Finally, it's clear that when the airport carried out the sequential assessment of available alternative sites, they failed to undertake a proper assessment of the site. They were fully aware of our site and the fact that an application was submitted. My proof of evidence sets out the details of the failings of the airport to assess the fact that the site I'm proposing is on brownfield land in the open countryside, adjacent to an A road and close to the junction 21 of the M5. It is not in the green belt. I should add, and this does add to my written submissions, so I apologise for that, but yesterday my learned friend Mr Humphreys mentioned in opening that no consent being available for the alternative site makes it irrelevant. I'd just like to add that this is of course completely incorrect. BAL are required to consider available alternative sites as part of sequential testing for green belt sites, regardless of whether an application is submitted or approved. I'm sure the inspectors will be fully familiar with the sequential testing process. I would also add that BAL have had every opportunity to review their sequential testing process and have not done so, despite being fully aware of our alternative site. This demonstrates that the airport are not going to consider this appropriately. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms Sutherland. Thank you very much. Okay. If we can then move on to the opening statement on behalf of the PCAA by Mr Morehouse. I should just say I'm also quite terrible with names. One of the blessings of virtual is that you get the names on the screen, so apologies in advance today if I make any mishap, but I'm right so far anyway, so thank you, Mr Morehouse.
Good morning. This opening statement on behalf of the Parish Councils Airport Association seeks to address the central pillars of the opposition to the proposed development within this appeal. As set out in the Parish Councils Airport Association statement of case, the PCAA strongly believes that this appeal is contrary to local policy, which is addressed primarily in the North Somerset Council's submissions. The PCAA does not propose to replicate all of those objections that it supports, but proposes to raise separate issues and to provide evidence to support the widespread local opposition to this appeal. Dealing with location and access, Bristol Airport is already one of the largest airports in the UK. It is the largest in the southwest and has been constructed and operated since the 1950s. The development of the airport has been ad hoc. It has never formed part of an integrated transport strategy. That is an extraordinary lack of foresight, given the millions of people per year already using the location. The result in its present state is an airport that is possibly the poorest served from the perspective of public transport in the country. It is miles away from the city it claims its name from, and access from Bristol without the benefit of any mass transit system along roads that were never built for such traffic, and that is the best route of access to the airport. For those travelling from other directions, there is no properly constructed route from the M5 motorway, and the situation from the east is even worse, there being no major roads to get people even close. All of these routes take the traveller through winding country roads and small villages. That the airport has been permitted to develop to its existing size, let alone expand even further, might properly be described as a complete failure of planning and integrated transport. The problems already created and existing today are something that the current appeal will only exacerbate. The appeal does not advance any solutions to the issues bedeviling the operation of the site, and the appellant has not, for example, prepared a surface access strategy that addresses the need for a strategic access infrastructure. North Somerset Council quite properly rejected the application. Turning to the environmental impact assessment, the EIA addendum and the EIA is, as a whole, fails to comply with the transport analysis guidance. This policy provides a comprehensive framework for the impact appraisal of airport planning proposals, amounting to a material consideration in the appeal. It cannot be ignored at the appellant's convenience. The socio-economic costs and benefits, the noise impacts and carbon emissions associated with the planning application must be analysed and monetised in full compliance with the criteria laid down in tag A5.2 and its supporting policies. Without this, there is no clear understanding of the negative costs of costing of the airport. In the PCAA statement of case, there was a suggestion that further environmental information under Section 25 of the Town and Country Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations 2017 be provided to enable the inspectors to make an informed decision. The appellant has rejected this best practice approach on the basis that the appeal does not of itself require significant infrastructure expenditure and therefore does not fall within the tag requirements. That approach, PCAA says, simply underlines the lack of merit in the original planning application. It is seeking to deal with issues that ought to, because of the scale of expanded operations at the site that are now envisaged, be being addressed by a properly structured approach that does assess these larger and wider issues. It is not an answer, say, the people that are going to be directly affected every day of their lives by the failure to address this as part of the appeal and planning application, to simply ignore the elephant in the room. Inevitably, should the appeal be permitted, there will be pressure to address the infrastructure deficit created by the additional volumes of traffic alone. It is not a responsible approach to ignore that impact. The tag analysis should properly have been conducted to enable a best practice, fully informed decision to be made. Turning then to noise, health and amenity. The problem that such development has already created, even without regard to modern scientific understanding of the bigger environmental issues, has already profoundly affected people living close to it for many years. Those representing the people living around the airport and underneath the flight paths properly take objection to the proposed expansion. Increased numbers of flights will increase the noise levels that people are exposed to. Increasing the number of night flights to exceed those even permitted at Heathrow Airport in number will result in unacceptable levels of intrusion on people's lives that will not be properly addressed by the mitigation proposed. The PCAA challenge the noise methodology used. It further challenges the future noise predictions which make the unproven assumption that future fleet changes will lead to a reduction in noise due to technology advancement. This is not based on any fact, knowledge or assurance, and there is additional uncertainty because many airlines have delayed or cancelled future orders for new, potentially less noisy aircraft because of the pandemic. Aircraft noise is linked to increased cardiovascular harm, impairment of endothelial function, an increase in blood pressure in people at risk of coronary heart disease. It's linked to adverse effects on children's education. There is a growing understanding of the health impacts of such operations, from the harmful effects of nitrogen dioxide and the fine particulate matter linked closely to respiratory disease, strokes, cancer, and heart attacks. Recent research has established a link between PM 2.5 and Parkinson's disease and also diabetes. In addition to harm, direct harm to people's health, the inquiry is going to hear about the daily impact on people's lives that those people living in the area surrounding the airport that have been turned into rat runs and unofficial car parks. If the appellant was advancing solutions to these issues as part of the appeal, there could be an element of discussion about the proposal. But what is advanced is not only more of the same, increased by volume, but also increasing the times of impact to even longer periods through the 24-hour day. Not only, for example, additional night flights, but additional night use of the rat runs by people getting to and from their flights by road. These issues are, to practical effect, simply ignored by the appellant. Noise, health, and amenity are all small words in a public inquiry, but significant to those people living with the consequences day in and day out, and night in and night out. Turning then to the economic claims, the appeal is accompanied by empty promises of job creation that local people have heard before. When the truth is that with the structure of holiday to business use, there is a huge imbalance in favour of the former, that is, that an expansion of the airport will do nothing to alter. And with the huge imbalance of holiday travellers leaving the UK, as opposed to visiting, that expansion will not be resolved. It's not hard to see why there is a real scepticism about the so-called economic benefit to the region from the proposal. The reality is that Bristol Airport is a leisure airport. In 2019, approximately 64% of its passengers were international outbound tourists. 11% were international inbound tourists. 10% were domestic tourists, and a mere 14% were business passengers. For every pound spent in the UK by foreign visitors flying to Bristol Airport, £5 are spent by UK tourists flying to foreign holiday destinations and resorts. This gives rise to a tourist deficit, which in 2019 amounted to £1.43 billion. Expansion, if there is a need for and an uptake of the capacity, will make that situation worse, not better. There is no evidence that business use and any benefit of connectivity will be expanded in any significant way at all by additional flights. The original application, together with this appeal, appears to have been made on the presumption that because there has historically been a sense that aviation growth will continue, that regardless of the issues arising locally, and even without addressing the issues, that permission ought to be granted. Those assumptions in the world that we live in today, for many reasons, no longer withstand scrutiny. Turning then to appropriate assessment. In relation to the SAC, the Special Area of Conservation, the PCAA statement of case at paragraph 5b identified that the wrong approach had been adopted in relation to the mitigation of the effects on the SAC in relation to the harm that would be caused to the SAC. As a general legal principle, the Habitats Directive does not of itself have any status under domestic law. However, the Habitats Directive are transposed into English and Welsh law by the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations 2017. The Habitats Regulations continue to have effect by virtue of Section 2 of the Withdrawal Act, the EU Withdrawal Act. Further decisions of the European Court of Justice made prior to the 31st of December 2020 continue to have effect in the UK by virtue of Section 3 of the Withdrawal Act. At present, those decisions may only be departed from by the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal, and not any lower tribunal. Decisions of the European Court of Justice made after the 31st of December 2020 are to be treated as persuasive authority. The core document 3.0413 contains the Bristol Airport Biodiversity Report prepared by John's Associates that in turn sets out that the SAC sets out the SAC conservation objectives at paragraphs 1.14 and 5. And these are the conservation objects for the SAC state. With regard to the SAC and the natural habitats and or species for which the site has been designated and subject to natural change, ensure that the integrity of the site is maintained or restored as appropriate, and ensure that the site contributes to achieving favourable conservation status of its qualifying features by maintaining or restoring the extent and distribution of qualifying natural habitats and habitats of qualifying species, the structure and function including typical species of qualifying natural habitats, the structure and function of the habitats of qualifying species, the supporting processes on which qualifying natural habitats and the habitats of qualifying species rely. That's significant in this case. The population of qualifying species and the distribution of qualifying species within the site. The conservation objectives for the site are set out at paragraphs B1 of CD core document 415. The designation includes a protection for the greater and lesser horseshoe bat. The report contains the acceptance that the development will result in the loss of 3.7 hectares of high-quality horseshoe bat foraging habitat associated with the proposed extension to the Silver Zone car park. That's phase 2, together with a loss of a small area, 0.16 hectares of woodland edge habitat on the A38 highway improvement land. It's accepted that the appellant, John's Associates report, that the maintenance of the SAC bat habitats applies equally to habitats used by horseshoe bats outside of the SAC boundary. In the appellant's own report, the following is advanced at paragraph 1.2.4. Where existing habitats or features of value to bats cannot be retained as part of the development proposal, the SPD requires a provision of replacement habitat. The surveys undertaken in accordance with the SPD are also required to inform the metric for calculating the replacement habitat to be provided. And the SPD sets out the precise methodology for calculating the appropriate level of replacement habitat. It continues, an ecological management plan for the site must be provided, setting out how the site will be managed for SAC bats in perpetuity. A habitats regulation screening assessment was carried out by North Somerset Council. This is at core document 415 in September 2019. It concluded that the plan or project is likely or may have a significant effect without mitigation on the lesser and greater horseshoe bat features of the site. And the matter was then taken forward to an appropriate assessment that included a more detailed study of the risk posed. It was considered that both the footprint of the proposed extended Silver Zone car park and the woodland by the A38 junction were of high value to horseshoe bats at a district level. It's obvious that should the project be permitted, that it would involve the destruction of the two identified high-value areas. Turning then to Regulation 63 of the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations, which provides at 63.5, in the Regulation 63.5, in the light of the conclusions of the assessment and subject to Regulation 64, the competent authority may agree to the plan or project only after having ascertained that it will not adversely affect the integrity of the European site or the European offshore marine site, as the case may be. And then Regulation 63.6, in considering whether a plan or project will adversely affect the integrity of the site, the competent authority must have regard to the manner in which it's proposed to be carried out or to any conditions or restrictions subject to which it proposes that the consent, permission or other authorization should be given. North Somerset Council then, it submitted in error, moved on to consider the provision of a mitigation strategy, which is set out at document D3.1 of the document. That mitigation strategy included both issues that could be, and there's no objection taken to those, they could be, some conditions could be conditioned, such as the SEMP and the conditioned retention of hedgerows, etc. But it also, at paragraphs 9 and 10, went on to deal with the purchase of replacement habitat through the purchase and enhancement of nearby woodland. The error is, having determined that the likely significant effect could not be excluded as a result of the destruction of key habitat that supported the SAC species, that it follows that conditions could not address that concern. The very construction of the car park destroys the SAC supporting habitat. It cannot be mitigated through conditions, and the only alternative is to provide compensation in the form of substitute habitat. Such compensation should follow the procedure set out in Regulation 64 of the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations, which provides at Regulation 64.1, if the competent authority is satisfied that, there being no alternative solutions, the plan or project must be carried out for imperative reasons of overriding public interest, which is subject to paragraph subsection 2, may be of social or economic nature. It may agree to the plan or project notwithstanding a negative assessment of the implications for the European site or the offshore marine site. And this issue was considered in the case of TC Briels and others, and the Minister for Infrastructure and Milieu, a European Court of Justice case which is binding on these proceedings, where such replacement habitat was clearly determined to be compensation within the meanings of Articles 6, 3 and 4 of the Habitats Regulations as enacted in Regulation 64 of the Conservation of Habitat Species 2017. Paragraph 33 of Briels, the Briels case, said the use of mitigatory conditions circumvented the procedure provided for in Article 6.3 of the Habitats Regulations, and it was ruled unlawful. It follows that in permitting compensatory habitat measures without following the Regulation 64 procedure, North Somerset Council and the appellant have made an error that the inspectors, you yourselves are as the appropriate authority, should not repeat. Should the appeal be granted in respect of the Silver Zone car park, the inspectors will need to be satisfied that every requirement of Regulation 64 is satisfied. For example, that there are no alternative solutions, such as alternative parking or improved public transport, that there is adequate compensatory provision available, and that there is an overriding public, as opposed to private commercial, interest for building on Greenbelt SAC supporting land. Turning then to climate change, North Somerset Council declared a climate emergency by passing an overarching resolution to take climate into account in all parts of its activities. The Council are not alone in that, and throughout the country and the world, those in positions of elected responsibility are doing the same. People are recognizing that the crisis facing our planet needs to be addressed by actions, not hollow words. And this period of time that we are in will be looked at with incredulity by people in the not very near future. People will rightly question the decisions of people to carry on as they always have in the face of an overwhelming body of evidence that demonstrates that even business as usual is not sustainable. The damaging impacts of climate change, the warming climate, unstable weather patterns, ocean acidification, and increased species extinction that we are all seeing are the result of what we are currently doing. The expansion of damaging activities for short-term economic interests of a single business will rightly be treated with outraged disdain. The actual harm being caused by the intensification of harmful activity in the face of all of the evidence has to be a central feature and a determining feature where there is no overriding public interest in determining the environmental pillar of the requirements for a development to be sustainable. The conclusions. The application is not supported by a best practice impact appraisal in accordance with TAG 8.5.2. There is no economic need for the proposed development. The improvements to the surface access infrastructure identified in the application would be wholly inadequate to support the increase in road traffic associated with the proposed development. The proposed expansion and year-round use of the Silver Zone car park would do further harm to the Greenbelt and highly sensitive natural habitats. The proposed expansion in passenger numbers would significantly increase the harmful exposure of local communities to nighttime noise and aircraft, as well as road traffic emissions. And the proposed development would further damage the residential amenity of the communities surrounding the airport. And I just add at this point, and I borrow it from the appellant's proof of evidence, paragraph 311, where the proof of evidence of Mr. Melling was referred to. And in relation to that, it seems to be that this isn't disputed, because his comment is, moreover, the ongoing problem of unauthorized off-site parking, which causes serious harm to the greenbelt, as well as adverse impacts on the amenity of local communities and the environment, will only be exacerbated should insufficient parking be provided at the airport. So the existing concerns, the existing serious harm is already, it seems, accepted. And the final concluding comment, the proposed development is incompatible with the stated government policy on climate change. Adding to carbon dioxide emissions rather than reducing them is contrary to the environmental considerations of sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morehouse. Okay, that concludes the opening statements of all the parties. So then we move on to the witnesses for the PCAA, and this is limited to those that wish to deal with residential amenity, and we have some parish council representation as well, and there's a noise witness. We'll have a short break just so that you can prepare your witnesses. So how long do you think you'll need?
Perhaps if we had, if I said 10 minutes, we'd probably be setting ourselves up to fail. Perhaps 15, if we could, please.
Yeah,
thank you.
No problem with that. Okay, and I can talk through the process as well for the witnesses in general. It's difficult because not everyone's in the room at the same time, but we'll do what we must. Okay, all right. If we come back then at 25 past. Thank you. All right, everybody, if everyone can proceed to their seats. Okay, so now we have examination in chief for the PCAA. We've read proofs, so we'll take them as read.
Thank you.
So if you, Mr. Morehouse, you take your witnesses through examination in chief, then there'll be cross-examination if Mr. Humphreys has any questions to put to witnesses. And just as a general point to witnesses, if you can answer the question yes or no and then qualify it. If you don't know or don't understand the question, please say. Hopefully it'll be a fairly friendly and swift session anyway. I don't anticipate any issues, but just to go over the process. And if there is any procedural questions that you're not sure about, just flag that to my attention. Okay, so I'll hand over to Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you. May I first start with Becky and Jenny Heath together, if we may?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, the microphones are a little bit tricky. If you press the button in the middle and speak into them, we should be able to hear. So welcome.
Thank you. And may I just start by just saying it's Becky and Jenny Heath, and you've made a proof of evidence which has been submitted to this inquiry, and I think you've got a copy of that with you there, haven't you? So far as Becky is concerned, we're taking what you've said as read to the inquiry, so we don't need to go through everything again. But if you can just give a summary of why you are here. How old are you?
I'm 14, and I'm at True Valley School, and I'm here to protest against the airport expansion because
What's your main concern in relation to the expansion of the airport?
Climate change. I think many of these effects will happen during my lifetime, and it's selfish for the people currently in charge of this airport to put their profits ahead of our chance at a stable future.
Thank you. And you attend True Valley School, you said. Without giving us an exact location, do you live in that area?
Yes, I live in Chewstoke.
Thank you. Turning, if I can, to you, Jenny. So far as you're concerned, Becky's older sister?
Yes.
And you also live in the same area. What is the primary concern that's brought you here today?
I think it's a combination of the impact on local residents and the impact on the climate as a whole.
Sorry, can everyone hear adequately? No.
I'm
Do you mind just coming a little bit closer? Thank
Sorry.
Yeah. If you move, I think the light's on the microphone.
Is that better?
Yeah, if you can just speak in. There's a bit of a knack, so don't.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Sorry, I was asking your concerns that had brought you here today in relation to this inquiry.
Yeah. I think a combination of the climate as a whole and the impact on local residents. I think as a local resident, I've really noticed since flights were re-allowed after lockdown, the noise of aeroplanes going over or near our house has significantly increased. So obviously it's extremely damaging for the health of local people. But furthermore, at a time when we have 12 years to save our planet from a climate-related disaster, I think it's simply irresponsible for the airport to be considering expanding and therefore expanding its emissions at a time like this.
Thank you. Thank you. Those are all the questions that I've got for you. I'm sure there will be some more in a moment.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Humphreys.
No, thank you both very much for coming, but I won't ask you any more questions. Your evidence is very clear. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Becky and Jenny Heath, and thank you for coming down today. So
thank you for allowing us to speak.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry, the next witness is Mr. Nick Tyrell. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Tyrell. And it's the same knack with the microphone, so if you can speak clearly into it, please.
I'll do my best.
Thank you.
And so far as you are concerned, you come here in a personal capacity, but also in relation to, I think, Barrow Guernsey Parish Council, is that right?
Absolutely, yes. This is a statement on behalf of the Parish Council.
On behalf of, thank you. And I think your statement makes it clear that the area of Barrow Gurney, the location of it in relation to the airport, what are we talking about?
We're talking about primarily traffic coming through the village being very disrupted. I will go into more detail in my statement.
Sorry, what? I didn't catch that last bit.
Sorry, I will go into more detail in my statement, but I did say it's primarily to do with traffic coming through the village.
Can we just clarify where is the village in relation to the airport, please?
The village is about 2 miles, but as the crow flies, north. I always get this upside down. North of the airport. So it's about 6 miles out of Bristol, 2 miles from the airport.
And so far as you are concerned, the village that you live in,
yes,
your statement is, as I say, taken as read, but can you give us sort of a little bit of a summary to the public inquiry about what it is, what is it?
Well, I've actually got a fairly full statement here. Would it be better if I just read that part out?
Please do.
Because frankly, you know, it's quite relevant to what I'm going to say. Do you want me to start at the beginning and take it right through?
I'm in your hands, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you. Well, yes, yours has a lot of structure to it, so yes, please.
Right, well, thank you. Barrow Gurney Parish Council wishes to confirm its strong objection to the proposed expansion of Bristol Airport. BGPC has previously lodged objections to proposals for or related to the expansion of the airport in January 2019 in respect of application 18P5118 outline. In November 2019, in respect of additional information supplied to application 18P5118 outline, and in October 2020, in respect of the Bristol Airport Limited Land at A38 and Downside Road Compulsory Purchase Order 2020. Barrow Gurney is a rural parish at the northernmost fringe of North Somerset District, bordering Bristol City. The village is approximately 6 miles by road from the city centre and only 2 miles as the crow flies from the airport. It is located roughly midway between the A370, Bristol to Weston-super-Mare Road, to the west, and A38, Bristol to the airport and Taunton to the east. It is rural in character, a diffuse village comprising 4 main component parts. Firstly, the village centre, the core of which was declared a conservation area in June 2018, predominantly linear in nature on either side of the B3130 Barrow Street, which links the A370 and A38. As well as numerous dwellings, it includes the Prince's Motto pub, a newly established village shop, the village hall and the village green and play area, all of which form the heart of the community. Secondly, Barrow Court, located on higher ground approximately 1 mile to the west of the village centre. Originally a 13th century Benedictine nunnery, it later became a private house, then for a short while a World War II military hospital, and thereafter a college of education from 1949 to 1976. It was subsequently divided into 19 separate residential freeholds and forms an important part of the village community, including the parish church of St Mary and St Edward. All court buildings are either Grade 2 or Grade 2 listed. Thirdly, the Naish Lane area, a cluster of houses located approximately half a mile to the south of the village centre, adjacent to the A38 and incorporating the Fox and Goose pub on the A38. And fourthly, Barrow Hospital, located approximately half a mile to the north-east of the village centre, a largely new and expanding housing community set in woodland on the site of the former psychiatric hospital, incorporating a terrace of original hospital cottages. As befits a rural community, there are also several farms and a scattering of more isolated homes in close proximity. The total population of the village was recorded as 349 at the last census in 2011. We estimate this will have expanded by approximately 30% since then as a result of the Barrow Hospital development. The B3130 route through Barrow Gurney village has long been regarded by many as a convenient shortcut, particularly by taxi companies travelling between the city and the airport, providing a convenient and direct route from the A370 to the A38. It is also a favoured route for traffic from Wales, most of which uses the M49 and M5 route to Portbury, then goes across country to the A38 via Barrow Gurney to avoid Bristol altogether. This is the shortest and most direct route from Wales to the airport and is recommended by SatNav. It is, however, singularly inappropriate for large volumes of traffic. The road through the village centre is single track in a number of places as it winds between the historic houses bordering the road on both sides, and there is a 7.5 tonne weight limit prohibiting HGVs. A traffic management scheme was implemented to deter traffic from coming through the village immediately after the new link road between the A370 and A38 was opened in 2016, and that is just a little bit further to the north, including the provision of speed humps and road narrowing on entry to the village, chicanes, road markings and signs to control the flow of vehicles, and narrow walkways alongside the road to facilitate access for villagers to the core facilities. Despite these restrictions, and due to SatNav, there is still more traffic using the road than is comfortable or safe for villagers, hence our strong objection to further growth. It is apparent from the addendum documents submitted, application number 20P2896 APCON, that Bristol Airport's case is based mainly on the assumption that air passenger numbers have been temporarily suppressed owing to the COVID-19 pandemic, and that they can be expected to return to similar levels within 3 to 4 years, reaching 10 million in 2024, 3 years later than originally projected, and 12 million in 2030, 4 years later than originally projected. There can clearly be no such guarantee. A number of factors mitigate against such a conclusion. Forecasts used have emanated entirely from within the aviation industry and are speculative. There is a worldwide climate emergency, and a desperate need to reduce carbon emissions. We are all, worldwide but importantly as a nation too, being encouraged to consider how we can reduce our own carbon footprint. Over the coming years, there will need to be huge behavioural changes, partly government-induced through alternative means of energy generation, promotion of changes to domestic heating systems, home insulation, etc., to reduce consumption of fossil fuels, and in particular in relation to transport, with a massive switch to electric, biofuel or hybrid cars and public transport. The aircraft industry is one of the major carbon polluters and has to play its part. However it plans to achieve this, it cannot escape the fact that the vast majority of its planes are reliant upon fossil fuels at present, and that many people will choose to reduce their air travel as an effective means of reducing their own carbon footprint. There has also been recent press speculation that financial penalties or restrictions on the number of flights permitted might be imposed on frequent flyers, again a disincentive to fly. Plans for electric, biofuel or perhaps hydrogen-powered aircraft have yet to demonstrate with any certainty that there is any realistic prospect of an environmentally acceptable alternative to fossil fuel-powered planes in the foreseeable future. The COVID-19 pandemic has encouraged people to think differently about their priorities, particularly in relation to the environment. Many have appreciated the change of lifestyle that the pandemic has necessitated, notably much greater home working leading to considerably less traffic on the roads and the relative absence of aircraft noise disturbance. This again might lead them to reduce the number of flights they make. The massive growth in online communications through Zoom, Teams, and other such means of holding face-to-face meetings remotely has brought very many to the realization that costly air travel for business purposes is often entirely unnecessary and can be more economically achieved. Many people will fear contagion while queuing at airports or sitting on tightly packed planes. Although vaccinations are already taking place, and bear in mind this was written 6 months ago, these will be rolled out over a period and are unlikely to be anywhere near complete until the summer of 2021. And even with these, we still have precious little knowledge as to how effective they will be over time and how frequently we may need to be revaccinated. The need to wear masks and observe social distancing could be with us for a very long time. There will be concerns over travel insurance costs, inability to recover losses of fares or booking fees in the event of cancellations, fear of being placed in quarantine when returning from holiday, or of visiting countries where medical facilities may be either expensive or unreliable. Above all, none of us know how many people will have lost their jobs or how long it will take the economy to recover, with potentially very significant impact on their ability to afford foreign travel. Taking these factors into account, it is conceivable that air passenger numbers may take a great deal longer than the ES addendum suggests to get back to pre-COVID-19 levels, let alone grow further. Even the Airports International Council report referred to on page 16 of the ES addendum main report, which does predict a potential return to pre-COVID levels by 2024, concludes, on the longer run, it is predicted that the global traffic will not return to previously projected levels within the next 2 decades, pointing to a potential structural change. This suggests that 12 million passengers per annum throughput at Bristol by 2030 may be very over-optimistic. We consider that Bristol Airport, rather than pursue an appeal, would have been wiser to accept that there has been a dramatic fall in passenger numbers, wait to take stock of how quickly the demand for air travel, and thus the aircraft industry as a whole, would take to recover, and at that stage, if necessary, resubmit a revised application that sought to find persuasive reasons to overturn the Council's comprehensive reasons for refusal of the application.
Mr. Tyrell, thank you for that. Sorry to interrupt. I think obviously we take the proofs as read generally, and I'm happy to have let you sort of read that bit out.
Okay.
Mr. Morehouse, perhaps if you can take Mr. Tyrell through the issues of major concern, which is the next section of the proof, please.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Tyrell, so far as all of that background is concerned, as a representative of the Barrow Gurney Parish Council, rather than looking at sort of policy issues, what is the impact of the development be, or what is the impact of the airport currently been on the community?
Okay. It has been one of generating an awful lot of unnecessary traffic coming through a minor B road. It is a B road, B3130, but it's, as I've explained, it is very narrow in places, and it does run through a residential community. It has been one of long tailbacks of traffic on approach to the main heart of the village centre. Admittedly, this has improved fairly substantially since the new link road was established just to the north between the A38 and the A370. However, we still get an awful lot of traffic coming through. Some of it starts at 4 o'clock in the morning, because that's one of the peak periods of outgoing flights. It peaks at about 6 o'clock in the morning. So we get taxis coming through, in particular, from Bristol and from Wales and from the Midlands, who come, down from the north. They tend to all come through Barrow Gurney. So we get quite a lot of traffic starting at 4 o'clock in the morning. At other times, in particular during the rush hours, we get quite We still get queues of traffic. We get quite a lot of incidents where there are places, one of them right by my house actually, where you have to stop, look and see if anything's coming in the opposite direction. And you will often get people trying to sort of force their way through, forcing others to reverse. You will get some pretty foul-mouthed language between opposing parties, and quite a lot of horn honking. So there are a number of issues there. But probably the most important thing is that you get a lot of vehicles overriding the new narrow pavements that were put in as part of the traffic management measures, and that causes danger to pedestrians as well. We have quite a lot of young people living in the village, so we do still have things like prams coming through the village, believe it or not, and you know, there is a certain danger there. But it's very disruptive to the village life.
And so far as the passage of vehicles through, are there any other, I'm looking at paragraph 17 of your statement, I think, when you talk about the direct impact on the village, are there other features that you'd like to bring to the inquiry's attention?
Well, I think I've mentioned quite a few things there. People do ignore the give way to oncoming traffic signs. We also get quite a lot of HGVs coming through, which is exceedingly unfortunate, given that there is a 7.5 ton weight limit, but a lot of companies ignore it. There are a number of people, including myself, who complain to companies whose lorries we can identify, asking for them not to come through the village, and they do always reprimand their drivers, and occasionally you'll get about a week or a fortnight space where you don't get those same vehicles coming through, but they always return to it.
That presumably is a feature of the sat-nav?
The sat-nav is the biggest single issue that encourages people through the village.
Your assessment of the impact of many thousands of additional car parking spaces being sited at Bristol Airport, what is your assessment of the impact of that?
Well, inevitably it will mean a great many more coming through our village. The new parking is proposed on Greenbelt land next to the airport. Can I just explain, there is a singular lack of public transport to the airport, and that is another of the main reasons why we get so much traffic coming through. Sorry, can you just repeat your question again?
I was asking about your assessment of the impact of many thousands of additional car parking spaces.
Yeah. Obviously, if there's going to be, I mean, the levels at the moment are around about 8.5 million, were in 2019 at about 8.5 million passenger per annum throughput. There is leeway to go up to 10 million. The transport consultant's assessment of likely impact on our village is that there will be virtually no increase in traffic coming through Barrow Gurney. I just cannot understand how that can have been concluded. As I say, cars come out of Bristol, a lot of them go straight up the A38, a lot of them go along the A370 and cut through Barrow Gurney village to the A38 because it's quicker to do so, and that is very much a favoured taxi route. A lot coming from Wales all come virtually automatically through Barrow Gurney village. Others from the Midlands also come down to Portbury and then cut down through Barrow Gurney village. Ones from the southwest will almost certainly go through other villages in order to get access to the airport, because we are a bit further north than they would need to travel to. But it's very substantial. And the idea that you can actually increase those passenger numbers without any more coming through our village, given that it's on sat-nav and is such a favoured route, seems to me just, unimaginable.
Okay. You've mentioned that there's a significant increase or noticeable increase of traffic around 4 a.m. And that you've indicated is linked to the flight times. What do you think the effect of having more night flights would be?
Well, I suspect that you would get more taxis coming during the night time at even more unsociable hours.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add on behalf of the parish?
I would like to say just a little bit more about the business of lack of public transport. As I heard you mention in your introductory comments, Bristol Airport is quite a way out of the city, and it's fairly poorly located in that sense. There is no real opportunity to improve the bus service to any significant degree that already runs from Bristol to the airport, because the A38 is single carriageway along most of its length. And I think this is a significant problem. What is ideally needed is a new rail route from Temple Meads out to the airport, or some sort of light transit route that avoids the A38. It's very difficult to envisage the A38 ever being widened, because you've got Barrow Tanks, the big reservoir serving Bristol, on either side along more than a mile of its length. And also any sort of widening of the A38 would encroach into green belt, so there'd be further environmental damage. So those are quite significant issues. We also believe that it would be advantageous to have a new park and ride somewhere probably in the vicinity of junction 21 of the M5 to collect the traffic coming down from the Midlands, up from the southwest, or even across from Wales, so that they could actually park there and then get a shuttle bus service across to the airport, hopefully a very sustainably powered shuttle bus service.
Thank you, Mr. Tyrell. Is there anything else you want to add?
I think that's probably the majority of my statement.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be questions for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Humphreys.
Mr. Tyrell, good morning.
Good morning.
Are you happy to just answer a very few questions from me?
I beg your pardon?
Are you happy to answer just a very few
Yes.
questions from me?
Yes, I'll do my best.
All right. Well, I'm sure you'll do very well. Mr. Turney, a lot of your evidence, I understand, is directed to highways issues, and we've got a highways topic coming later, so I'm going to reserve some questions for other witnesses. But I just want to ask you, firstly, two things about highways, and then one point on a slightly different point that you make. So firstly, on highways, as you've said, one of the main problems is sat-nav. Obviously, with sat-nav, I don't doubt for a moment that it will direct some people going to the airport through the road through the village. But obviously, sat-nav will direct all sorts of people through the village if it regards it as the best route. Sat-nav takes people through village roads all over the country, not just near airports. You probably are able to agree that.
Yes.
And both the A370 and the A38 also lead to Weston-super-Mare.
Yes.
And that's also a destination that you would expect people coming from Bristol or other directions where they would come from the north to use those roads, and sat-nav may well direct them through the village, and they're not actually going to the airport at all. They're just going to Weston-super-Mare or other destinations further south.
I think, generally speaking, anyone going from Bristol would certainly take one or other road and wouldn't probably pass between the two, because it would lengthen their journey unnecessarily. That is not the case with the airport, because it avoids so much of the traffic on the A38. So
yes,
very...
but isn't that exactly the point? That people might start on one route thinking they're going to Weston-super-Mare or somewhere else. The sat-nav then takes them on what may be a longer route, but is deemed to be a quicker route. And there's no survey. We don't actually know who's in these vehicles and why they're taking the route through the village, do we? There's no survey.
No, but I think you need to understand that the A38 gets congested coming a long way north from the airport towards Bristol.
Yes.
Therefore, if someone were on the A370, if they were going to Weston-super-Mare, they would just continue along that rather than cut through.
Okay. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I think there's nothing more to say really on that.
As I say, there may well be people going to the airport, but we've certainly got no survey data to know what proportion are going to the airport, and there are other destinations they could be going to.
Yes, I have to accept that.
That's very fair. You mentioned so I'm going to move now to a slightly different point, but still on traffic. You mentioned the point about HGVs, and in your written proof of evidence, I think it's paragraph 14, do you want to just look it up? It's not...
Yep.
You refer there to page 31 of the transport chapter of the ES addendum.
Yeah.
And the fact that it forecasts 3.2% of traffic, HGV traffic on Barrow Street, and you question that and you say there's a ban on HGVs and therefore we have no confidence in the data provided. You see that?
Yes, I do.
But as you have just told us, HGVs do use Barrow Road.
Yes.
And I don't know whether we need to look it up. Do you, on the little list that I circulated, there was Mr. Witchell's rebuttal proof. Do you have that to hand?
No, I don't have.
Don't worry. I don't know whether Mr. Morehouse... Well...
Yeah, no, I believe it can be provided to me.
If you could go in there and turn to page just 43. I've got it on PDF.
Page 43.
So 43, the sort of actual page number. In the PDF, it's...
All right, it's taking me time to get there.
Don't worry at all. Believe me, I've never cross-examined anyone using documents on a screen either, so this is new for both of us. I think it's PDF page 48, if it's easier to look that up.
48 now?
Yeah. Well, it's real page 43, but in the PDF, because it doesn't
Okay.
count the first pages, it's 43. It's 48. Take your time. There's no hurry.
I'm still wading through. Right. Page 43. I'm on it. Yep.
You got it?
Oh, it mentions me. Oh dear.
Do you have the page?
Yes, I do.
And you see there, this was a response to, in fact, your points from Mr. Witchell's. And what he's set out in that table, 6.1, is the actual traffic counts along the road. And you can see, it's exactly your point. There are actually a number of HGVs that currently travel along the road. Do you see?
Yes.
So you get the 2-axle, 3-axle, 5-axles, Arctics, HGVs, all the rest of it, and you get all the numbers there. But what he says in the next paragraph, so just at the beginning of the next page, 642, the traffic forecasts used in the Transport Assessment Addendum and the Environmental Statement Addendum don't add any new HGV trips to Barrow Street, but merely reflect the fact that there are already some HGVs using the road. This is therefore consistent with the values set out in the table. Now, your point is, because we've got HGVs shown in the model, 3.2%, this gives you no confidence in the data. But the data, the 3.2%, is actually the existing vehicles. It's what you described in your evidence in chief. That's fair, isn't it?
Yes, it is fair.
Okay.
I wonder if I could just make another point, if you can just bear with me a moment.
Of course.
there were a number of other issues that I did raise in my proof.
So can you speak into your microphone?
Sorry,
So
I beg your pardon.
We're a long
Thank
way
you.
from each other, sir.
Sorry. I did make a number of other points about the routes that have been selected by the transport consultants, which seem to very purposefully avoid Barrow Gurney, which was sometimes the most obvious route that vehicles will take. So that is another point I would wish to make.
All right.
But there was one other table that I picked out from an earlier iteration, I think, of the transport information, which, if you'll just allow me to read out, compared traffic forecasts from 2026 with all traffic 18-hour without development, 2026 with development, and it forecast basically that they would remain exactly the same, both for car-borne traffic and HGV traffic. And it therefore forecast that on Barrow Street there would be 0% increase in traffic with the expansion of the airport. I find that just, as I said before, unbelievable. I can certainly furnish you with a copy of that, but I'm afraid I don't have copies to distribute here.
Don't worry, we've got, that's from the original transport assessment.
Yes.
We've got that, and I suspect that document and the addendum will get discussed a lot during the
I'm sure
highways
it will.
topic. So, can I just take up one then slightly different point with you? It's again a short point, and I'm going to need to take you to a document. So if I say the document now, then your assistant colleague there can be getting it up whilst I just introduce the point. And it's a report that's CD 13.1, and you refer to this in your paragraph 7. It's a slightly different point. It's not a highway traffic point. And in your paragraph, there you say you're talking actually about some forecasting matters, and you draw attention to an Airport International Council, ACI. I think it's Airport Council International, but ACI report, referred to on page 16 of the ES addendum made report, and then you draw out a particular quotation from that. And I'd just like to go to the original document and just see the context for that.
Can I just say the report I have doesn't actually have page numbers, so you might need to...
You're absolutely right. ACI haven't been very helpful to either of us. So if you've got the document, I'll take you to the PDF. I'll take you to the PDF page. I've just got to open it myself. And in the...
It tells me it's got 11 pages in all. So
I think you're ahead of me. I think it's PDF 10. PDF page 10. Go to that. And the very last bullet point, do you see it on that page, PDF page 10?
Yes, in the long run.
In the long run. That's, I think, it's a slight misquote at the beginning, but it is a paragraph. I think that's what you're quoting there. It's predicted that global traffic will not return to previously projected levels within the next 2 decades. Now,
that's correct.
Can we just sort of understand that? Firstly, if you look at the previous bullet point, you'll see that the quotation relates not to their baseline scenario, their sort of balanced scenario. It relates to their pessimistic scenario. Do you see that?
Yes.
And so the inspectors just need to note, don't they, that this was ACI's most pessimistic here scenario. But if we go on to the next page, we actually see the forecast, and the dark red line there is the pessimistic scenario, and The sort of orangey one is the revised projection. That's the more sort of balanced one. Now, 2019, pre-COVID, is 100, okay? So even on their pessimistic scenario, by 2024, they're projecting airport throughput slightly above 2019. Do you see that?
I do. I question it. I question it, I say.
And even on the most pessimistic scenario, by 2025, they're forecasting traffic 15% above 2019.
Yes, I see that.
On their balance, their middle scenario, in 2025, they're 20% above
Yes, I see that.
2019. So when they are talking here about not returning to previously projected levels, what they are talking about there is that the red line doesn't quite catch up with the blue line, the blue dotted line, the projected baseline, for about 20 years. But that doesn't mean that there isn't substantial growth, does it?
No, as I said at the outset, though, I think, I would question all of these figures because they emanate from within the industry, and they're obviously looking or trying to look as positively as possible at what the impacts might be. But I think from the comments that I read out at the beginning of my statement, there are an awful lot of reasons as to why the numbers might not creep up that high.
Yes. Mr. Tony, I'm simply taking you to the thing that you rely on and pointing out what it actually says and the implications of it. And
yes.
you accept that, I assume?
Yes.
Of course. Mr. Tony, thank you very much. Sorry about the technology and getting documents.
Thank you, Mr. Humphreys. Mr. Young has some questions for you as well before re-examination from Mr. Morehouse.
I'll not recover some of the points that have just been put to you, but Mr. Tyrell, one of the points to pick up on, you talked about a possible park and ride, and that might relieve some traffic, I think, through your village. But you didn't expand on that point. Have you actually done any work to identify a possible site and a possible route? And is there any route available that would avoid going through villages?
Well, there was one application that was submitted originally about 18 months ago and then withdrawn. And there is a more recent one, which is, I believe, now under consideration by North Somerset Council. And that is the Heathfield Park proposal, which I have mentioned in my statement, which I think we would be likely to support. So yes, there is a site that has been identified there. There are a number of issues obviously to be considered, but in principle, we would like to see some. There are other opportunities around there, I think, as well. There's quite a lot of open land that's not on Greenbelt in the vicinity of Junction 21. But just, the simple fact of having somewhere that could accommodate an additional 2,000-3,000 cars would be likely to take a lot of the motorway traffic away from the villages in North Somerset, because it would give them the opportunity to go straight to the car park, get a shuttle bus through to the airport. And the biggest problem that we have in North Somerset is the network of small minor roads crossing between the A38 and the A370 in and around the vicinity of the airport. And the fact that, it means that traffic unnecessarily percolates through those roads when it would be far better for them to have a destination either on the motorway or directly at the airport itself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you. Just in relation to the questions you were being asked about the use of Barrow Gurney as a cut-through and the destinations of travel of people. Is there any, in your assessment, living in the village, is there a link between the flights and the volume of traffic?
Most certainly there is. During the pandemic, we have been blessed with a very peaceful time with horses clopping through the main street, which has been delightful, and very few cars in comparison with normal. That's obviously partly due to a lot more home working probably, and fewer people going into the city. But yeah, certainly when the number of flights increases again, we will have a lot more traffic coming through.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your time today. Okay.
Thank you for letting me read out our statement. I apologise if I started going through it in detail.
No, it's you know, it's new for everyone, I'm sure, but thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
May I now call Mr. Peter Longdon, whose statement appears under the heading Winford Parish Council.
Thank you. Which the oh no, Dom's got it. You've got Mr. Tyrell's okay. The proof. No, I haven't got it. Paper. No. I think you took it out.
Thank you. Mr.
Good morning.
Mr. Longdon, you've submitted a proof of evidence as well to the this inquiry, and I think you're here to assist the inspectors as a representative of Winford Parish Council.
Yes.
And so far as the Winford itself is concerned, just for those who may not be immediately familiar, where is it in relation to, physically in relation to the airport, please?
Right. Well, Winford Parish is immediately on the east boundary of the airport. Part of Winford Parish is a large area of common land called Felton Common, and the eastern boundary of Felton Common is only a few yards from a set of landing lights.
Okay. So you're right up against the edge of the airport boundary?
Yes.
Okay. Your proof of evidence, which is taken as read, just to go through some of them, can I just have your attention to the impacts paragraph in your statement, please? I think you identify, having considered the position, some 7 specific impacts. Can you just headline what those are, just in summary, please?
Well, the first one is an effect of the character of the villages. I'm saying that the rural villages of Felton, Winford and Redgell are increasingly commercialised with B&Bs, park in my drive houses, meet and greet parking operations, plus some organised parking in fields. We also get casual airport parking by airport users who just leave cars around the village roads and surrounding lanes or on Felton Common.
Just in relation to that, I think your proof of evidence, I think you've submitted some photographs as evidence of that later on in the proof of evidence. I don't think we can show it to the inquiry, but if you turn to that page on your of your proof, please.
Yes.
I think you've got one description of cars parked on Felton Common. What are those cars doing there, as far as you're aware?
Well, Felton Common is, for a large number of people in the area, a very pleasant walking and dog walking area, and so a lot of people arrive there for that. But when the airport has been in operation, it's also quite noticeable that quite a large number of airport taxis use those common car parks as waiting areas while they're waiting for their flight arrivals or meeting their passengers.
Okay, now I think your proof makes it clear that those are unofficial car parking areas. Are there facilities for the people that...
Those parking areas on the common are provided for people who use the common for proper recreational activity, not for airport parking.
Okay. Is there a consequence to, for example, taxi drivers and the like using that area as a waiting area?
Yes, unfortunately, it is used as a waiting area, and inevitably, because of the way things are on waiting taxi drivers, they use the bushes as a toilet. Okay. And this is right by our church.
Okay. Just going back to the impacts paragraph, if I can, you've indicated the change in the nature of the village, both the types of uses of property and the car parking. What about the hours of operation or the hours of that sort of disruption taking place?
Inevitably, with the airport being a 24-hour operation, those impacts will spread throughout the 24 hours.
So far as the expansion of the airport and noise, would you like to make any observations to the inspectors about that, please?
Well, one of the comments I draw your attention to near the end of my statement, under residents' comments, the aircraft noise comment, the first one is, the quiet at night during lockdown means I sleep better and feel noticeably more refreshed during the day.
Now, so far as the periods of time that noise impacts the residents of that parish, can you assist the inspectors at the moment with what you're putting up with?
Well, at the moment, of course, the airport is beginning to build up its flights again, and so people are beginning to realise that the noise and disturbance will continue as it has before the present restriction through the pandemic.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on an expansion of night flights and the impact that will have on people in that parish?
Well, earlier on in my statement, I draw attention to the DEFRA noise policies, identified, and it shows that the volume of noise under the terms LOAEL and the advance from that SOAEL are the terms which identify in the noise policy statement for England the lowest observable adverse effects and the significant OAEL that cause people to be aware of the noise around them, and that these, under the assessments of BA's consultants they predict that as traffic increases in the future at night, the number of dwellings experiencing noise levels at or above LOAEL will rise from 3,750 to 5,150. An additional 1,400 dwellings will be impacted by these higher noises.
And from the point of view of those people living in your parish directly underneath those flight paths, what do you fear the impacts are going to be if there's an expansion?
Well, we have some statements here from the various members of the parish. And looking particularly at I'm looking for the comment. Right. We have a comment here from a member of the parish who lives on the east side of Winford, approximately 2 miles away from the airport, but directly under the flight path. With the prevailing wind and the aircraft coming into land pass over us at about 400 feet. When the wind is in the east and the aircraft as they take off are accelerating and climbing steeply, in both situations we can neither entertain in nor enjoy the proper use of our garden, as the noise of the aircraft makes conversation impossible. The aircraft fly throughout the night, so we cannot sleep with an open window in the summer. At peak times, there are aircraft movements every 3 minutes or so. so there is little respite from the noise. That comment also goes on to identify that, in addition, the aircraft, as they pass over, leave their exhaust fumes and unburnt fuel, resulting in a miasma of paraffin and sooty deposits on fruit trees and hedges. As there's no proper transport provision for the airport, our roads become so clogged it's difficult to emerge from our lane in the car, and out of the question to walk to the village along the road. These are from a selection of comments from various parishioners.
Yes, and I think you've both included comments in favour of development as well as those of people against.
I did. All the comments were from identified parish residents.
Would you say on balance that what you've put there reflects the feeling in that area?
Yes, I'm sure.
Okay. If you'd like to wait there, there'll be some further questions, I'm sure.
Thank you. Mr. Humphreys.
Mr. Longton, again, are you happy just to answer just a very few points?
Yes, carry on.
Of course. Really things to, in part, to clarify certain things. The closest settlement to the east of the runway is Felton, and then Winford is beyond that. When you were describing Felton Common, you described that, and forgive me if I misunderstood, as being part of Winford parish. Is that because there's just a sort of strange shape to the parish boundaries, or are they is it a kind of joint parish or something like that? Just explain to the inspectors.
Yes, indeed. Felton Village is the nearest village of the parish to the airport. To the east of Felton Village is the Winford Village.
Yes.
And the third village in the parish is Regill, and that's probably to the south of Winford.
Yes. And so that's all the same parish, is it? That's
yes.
called Winford parish, but we should understand it as comprising all three of those settlements.
Yes.
That's really helpful. The second thing, you talked about the waiting taxis and antisocial behaviour, and that's, clearly unacceptable. There's no issue with that. But let's just think about the solution to that, because that's happening at the moment. The solution surely is to encourage vehicles that are waiting to wait at the airport or at other appropriate places, and enforcement action. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and we've had quite a lot of discussion and cooperation from the airport going back to when it was in full operation, because they have their ability to geo-fence the communications methods that are agreed with the taxi firms, so
yes.
that taxis cannot as easily, safely wait in the areas that we describe as being sensitive to us, because they are prevented from receiving the electronic communications from their base.
And that's very fair. I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that actually you've worked very well with the airport to try to tackle these issues, and the airport's been open to that, and the parish council's been very open to it, hasn't it?
Indeed.
Okay. Third point really is a point of clarification. In your proof, Mr. Longdon, paragraph 3, you're commenting about the consultants Wood and their report, and so Wood are a very large firm of consultants who've acted for the airport, and you say the airport's expansion consultants, Wood, noted in their comments that the airport noise levels are predicted to increase to noticeably damaging levels. See note 8 below. And I couldn't see a note 8 to try and understand what that was. And forgive me if I've just sort of missed the obvious.
Sorry, could you expand further on that? I've now got the page talking about, I think.
Of course. In your paragraph 3, you're commenting on the consultants Would, and you say they noted in their comments that airport noise levels are predicted to increase to noticeably damaging levels. I wanted to try and understand what precisely was said, and you say see note 8 below, and I can't find a note 8, and that may be my fault. Wouldn't be the first time. But I wondered if you could just let me know what that is.
I'm just trying to find that reference, I'm sorry.
Don't worry, there's no hurry, take your time, and if it's not obvious, then, you know, through Mr. Morehouse, just give us a note later. I'm more than happy for that.
I'm afraid that's a failure on my part in not identifying the note, the section 8 that you want to refer to.
Mr. Longden, I can't tell you how relieved I am because I thought it was me. Look, just pass us a note later. It doesn't need to be today, whenever, just through Mr. Morehouse, and then we can look at that, and the inspectors at least then will know what you were referring to. Would you do that?
Yes, what I'm referring to is that concerning aircraft noise, it's BA's consultants identified in their various statements, which I refer to, that we will experience something like 1,400 more dwellings being impacted by higher noise levels, which I've explained there as we talked of earlier.
I see. So it's not that the consultants said that these were damaging levels. That's in effect I understand that. That's your comment on the tables that set out the numbers of people within various contour bands.
And in reference to the National Noise Policy for England.
MPSE. Okay. Ms. Langdon, thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. No. Okay. Mr. Morehouse.
Just one thing, Mr. Longland. Do you know, you've said that there were discussions with the airport about interfering with the communications of the taxi firms. Can you help us with what powers they're using to interfere with other people's communications?
I think it's not interfering without proper consultation and agreement, I take it, because the airport has always worked with us, and we appreciate that cooperation.
Just the inspectors obviously need to understand what the legal authority is, obviously, for the sort of action if that's being considered by people. But you don't know what the legal authority is.
I don't know that it was covered. All that activity was taken up by the airport staff themselves.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Longden. Thank you.
Thank you. The next, thank you very much, Mr. Longden. The next witness is Tracy Harding.
Morning.
Good morning, Miss Harding. Thank you.
Thank you. You're Tracy Harding, and I think you have provided also proof of evidence to the inquiry.
Yes.
And your proof of evidence starts with the words, public speaking is not my thing, but you feel very strongly.
But I feel strongly about it, so.
And you've indicated in your proof of evidence that you live in Felton, and you've lived there since 1976.
Yes.
Can you just help the inspectors where that is in relation to the airport, please?
I can see it from my bedroom window, 5 minutes walk away, slightly to the north of the airport.
Thank you. And what issues have you, it might help if you have a look at your proof.
Would you like me to read it if it's short, or is there
it is short. It may help.
I haven't got facts and figures, or it's just very personal, so...
If you start with the paragraph, the problem that...
Yeah.
Well, I'm not a... yes, I'm not a NIMBY. if you start there and then
okay. I've not said I've never flown or never intend to fly again, but because the airport's there and if it's near me, I'll use it. I've got to put up with everything else. But I'm against the continual expansion and total disregard to the local environment and relentless erosion of our quality of life. This most awful pandemic that has forced a temporary closure and grounding of most flights has highlighted the noise and pollution already endured by us in the surrounding villages. We can hear birdsong and we can taste the clean air. When the occasional plane starts to take off, well, even more again now, you can smell the aviation fuel immediately. This highlights the amount of pollutants normally in the everyday air that we didn't really notice before because I think we're just used to it. I worry about the effects of these pollutants on the health of my family, my children, and my children's children. My daughter having recently married. The problem of noise will be non-stop. The airport not being able to extend the runway to accommodate the proposed expansion in flight numbers. This would mean the removal of the cap on night flights, the constant noise day and night from planes on the tarmac, taking off and landing, and all the associated road traffic will be unbearable. Pre-pandemic, we would get a few hours of quiet time in the early hours, but this was still only short-lived, and with the A38 road noise starting before the flights, the traffic on the A38 would be non-stop. Sleep deprivation associated with this will impact on our mental health. I do not want to live in a sealed box to keep out the effects out. I feel as if the airport is completely taken over all aspects of life. At peak times, before the pandemic, we were having to keep windows shut because of the noise. Lanes being used as rat runs surrounding green belt fields glistening with car parks. Every lay-by being used as waiting areas for taxis and cars, and rubbish, including human feces. We have horses, and even in pre-pandemic, we try to avoid hacking out at peak times for our own safety, as the narrow lanes become extremely dangerous with all the extra road traffic. This is not acceptable, and this will only get worse. The thought of what we must endure at peak times being continual depresses me hugely. I urge you to respect the decisions made by the local councils when it was voted to oppose the expansion and do not overturn this decision. And anybody, this is extra, I've just listened to all you guys. If anybody wants to hear it firsthand, you're more than welcome to come and visit and experience it from my house, my home.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Generous offer. I have no further questions, but if you'd wait there, please.
Ms. Harling, thank you very much. No, I don't need to ask you anything. It's all very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We don't have any further questions either. Just to say, I know that the PCAA have been involved in looking at the site itineraries, etc. as well. So just to assure you, I can't promise we'll particularly visit people's properties. We'll have to sort of look at that when we look at the itinerary in August.
No problem.
But certainly we've noted that. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder whether now might be an opportune time to have a short break. Again, we organise people to come in tranches to avoid unnecessary early attendances, if I can put it that way.
Yes.
And it would just help to have 10 or 15 minutes now, if we may.
Yeah, I'm
Thank you.
content with that. I say 15 minutes because 10 minutes just seems to fly by. So if we come back at 10 to 12, then thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, welcome back everyone. If everyone can take their seats, please. So we're kicking off now with David Vaughan.
Thank you. I can see Mr. Vaughan is approaching.
Welcome, Mr. Vaughan.
Good morning.
Mr. Vaughan, you're another local resident who submitted a proof of evidence in relation to the inquiry.
Yes.
So far as you are concerned, you give evidence from the perspective of someone who lives in the village of Cllr.
Yes, we live south of Cllr, going up the hill by a place called Rodyate Lane on the A370. So we're practically directly under the flight path.
Okay. And I think your proof of evidence gives a history of having, through your marriage, I think, acquired a property in the area which was then rebuilt because of the noise. Is that right?
Yes, it wasn't totally because of the noise, but it was quite a lot due to the noise. An 1830s house doesn't really deal with aircraft noise, and in doing so, we became quite aware of how difficult it is to soundproof a house, especially to soundproof it during the summer, spring and autumn when you've got windows open.
So when the windows aren't open, you've provided some mitigation for the noise.
It's during the winter when you've got windows closed. It's okay. During the summer and springtime and autumn, when you've got vents open, windows open, it's pretty dire. To give an example, Saturday morning, very early in the morning at 12:30, and then 12:35, 2 planes came over, and then at 1:10, another plane came over. So if you're trying to sleep in those situations, it's pretty nigh impossible if you've got your windows open. Okay. And so I woke up twice as a result of that.
Okay. And that's presumably because the windows are open in your property at the moment, is it?
It's pretty difficult to exist even with the well-insulated house. But yes, they are open, and the only alternative would be to have air conditioning and a completely enclosed house. And of course, that has huge implications on the environment in terms of running costs. Because I don't think Bristol Airport offers air conditioning as a way of mitigating sound. So yes, it's the only thing you can do is open the windows and suffer loss of sleep.
And is that something that you've raised with the airport itself?
I've raised the noise levels of particular flights. I have to say I don't find Bristol Airport particularly sympathetic to anything other than the rules that they work around.
What sort of responses have you had in your, this is your evidence about your own experience with Bristol Airport, what sort of response did you get from them about that particular complaint?
Well, to give an example, there have been quite a few helicopters which have jet engines. They are, in some cases, more noisy than the aircraft that come over, and yet Bristol Airport say helicopters are counted as small aircraft, and there are absolutely no rules about flight paths, noise mitigation of small aircraft. I said in my statement, it's like the Wild West with Bristol Airport, and I think that's a classic example. If I look at Heathrow Airport, for instance, they have a night charter that they publish on their website about how they deal with local residents and how they mitigate flights from 11:30 at night to 6 o'clock in the morning. I've not seen anything that Bristol Airport is volunteering along those lines and noise mitigation.
Okay. Does an increase in night flights therefore have any concerns for you?
Say again? Sorry?
Does the proposed increase in night flights therefore have concern for you?
Oh, massive, because we mentioned it's not just us, it's people who visit the house, for instance, trying to buy a house. If they hear the noise, they're immediately put off by that noise. If it's worse, that can only make that situation worse, but living under it, you stop speaking when an aircraft comes over for about half a minute or more. It's impossible to have a conversation. It drowns music in the house if you're listening to it and you have the windows open. That happened today, this morning. And at night, it's pretty difficult to visualize how if there are extra increased flights during the night, and I don't know what frequency and when they'll occur, but there's been a common theme from when I've been here today about night flights breaking sleep, and it will just get worse.
So are there any other issues that concern you about the proposal?
Well, going through the paragraphs, I think the main one is noise, pollution a bit. We can smell air fumes, and we're about 5 kilometres from the runway, so it obviously exists some pollution there. And basically, the real concern we have is this proposal to reallocate flights from a summer limitation to just an allocation for the year, and I'm absolutely certain everything will be during the summer months and will have a far greater impact on people.
Thank you. If you'd like to wait there, there may be some further questions for you.
Mr. Vaughan, are you happy just to answer a very few questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Vaughan, you've talked about the flights and flights during the night. Obviously, the 2011 Planning Permission contained a set of conditions, and all the flights are in accordance with the planning permission that's been granted to the airport, aren't they?
Is that good news for me or not? I've just been saying about how it impacts
Yes.
me. If that's what they're operating with, then yeah.
Yes, but you're not suggesting that they've been breaching any of their conditions or anything else, because the council would enforce, wouldn't they? They would enforce if that was the case.
I presume so.
Okay. And there are a series of conditions in the 2011 planning permission, but what we do know is that under the current application, a number of those conditions are actually being tightened in relation to the airport, or new conditions imposed. You're probably aware of that?
I'm not involved in the exact detail of the planning applications.
Okay.
What I am told is that there are going to be more flights probably during the summer, in the night.
Yes, the same total overall through the year, but the removal of the restriction as to whether they're winter or summer.
Which therefore means they're likely to be during the summer and have more impact upon residents, because residents will actually have their windows open, will not be so sound insulated, and therefore will be impacted further by it.
And that's why, for the first time, a night noise contour limit is going to be imposed, and that's new, isn't it?
I don't know, I'm sorry.
Okay. Do you know about the current QC condition? You may not, and just say you
don't.
No, okay, absolutely fine.
I've just talked about personal experience.
Of course.
I'm not an expert on sound and the things you're talking about.
But that's not a criticism of you at all. As far as helicopters are concerned, the current application isn't applying for anything different on helicopters, is it?
I don't know. All I've commented in is what the situation is at the moment, which when I complained about a jet helicopter which made a horrific noise, worse than some of the worst planes which you're experiencing, I was told, small aircraft, no rules, they can do what they like. Okay. And you would have thought with a helicopter, it could go horizontally and then vertically rather than diagonally, getting lower and lower over properties as it goes into the airport.
Now, you then draw a contrast between Bristol and Heathrow, and I think you tell us you also have a property in Hammersmith?
We had a property beside Hammersmith Bridge, and now we have a property at Cllr Bridge.
Right. And as far as you talk about Hammersmith in the proof, obviously there are some pretty big differences. For one, at Hammersmith you live, what, some 16 kilometres from the airport, whereas in Cllr, I was trying to look on the plan.
I looked at Google and it looked like it was about 5 kilometres from the edge of the runway, due in line with the runway.
Yes, obviously the aircraft takeoff, well, which end, are you at the St Nicholas Church end or the Holy Trinity Church end of Cllr? You're at the top end, aren't you?
We're at the top end,
so
by the
closer to St.
Star Inn.
Nicholas?
At the top of it is a high ground.
So is it close to St Nicholas?
Pardon?
Close to St Nicholas Church.
Which church?
I think, is it St Nicholas in Cllr?
I think...
I'm trying to... I
are
went past it the other day, and I don't know where your house is, and I'm just trying to place where the house is.
St Nicholas Church is in
if you go south of the A370 and go up the road, up the hill towards the Star Public House,
so we're
it's
going
probably
north.
two-thirds. We're south of Cllr.
South of Cllr, okay. South of Cllr. So next to Kingswood, I think you said.
Kingswood forms part of our property.
Right. So you make a point later about the height of the airport, and you say the airport is a high airport. So the airport I can see is at about 170, 180 meters above ordnance datum. I can see on the ordnance survey map. Yeah?
Yeah, I'm just repeating what I've read. It was the second highest airport in the UK.
Okay. But Kingswood, obviously there are a lot of contour lines in Kingswood, but Kingswood is lower than the airport, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And so I wasn't quite sure I understood. The aircraft will take off from the airport at 170, 180 meters, and they will go up. So the fact that you're lower means there's a greater distance between you and the aircraft.
I would agree, but the contour maps of sound all seem to be concentric circles coming from Bristol Airport that I've seen and make no allowance for height.
Well, we can ask Mr. Williams about that, but if it doesn't, and if it did, it would reduce the noise at your location.
It should mitigate.
Yeah,
but
okay.
The sound is high or loud.
The last point I just wanted to check with you. You said Bristol Airport is served by older aircraft, and I wondered where you got that from. The largest carriers are Ryanair and EasyJet, and they're generally recognized to have two of the youngest, newest, most modern aircraft fleets in the country, indeed in Europe.
Well, that's the country, the UK. I haven't done a analysis of what flies in and out of Bristol, but by just looking at the flights, they look older. They don't look modern, and I suppose that's backed up by the new jets that we've been promised. I don't think any have appeared at Bristol Airport.
I think a lot of them are operating at Bristol. A lot of the newer types. Anyway, but that's your impression.
Yes.
At looking at it. Mr. Vaughan, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughan. Just a question, just with regards to the helicopter with the jet engine that you mentioned. What's the sort of frequency of you hearing those? Are they weekly, monthly, daily?
No. Weekly or monthly, but it's piercing when it comes through. But helicopters generally, there are quite a few. I think I put in my evidence, I think there's about 10. And they have recently been doing them training flights where these helicopters just fly in circles around Bristol Airport. And so you're getting it all the time from the helicopters training.
And they're different to a jet
They're not
helicopter.
jet engine, but they're
Okay.
still noisy.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Right.
Mr. Morehouse, did you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you very
Cheers.
much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. The next witness on the list, Mr. Dafford Williams, I've been informed has some concerns about COVID and those provisions. I've spoken to Mr. Humphreys about his evidence, and we are suggesting that his statement be read to the inquiry by my instructing solicitor, if that's convenient to the inquiry. He's quite keen that his evidence is presented to the inquiry. It's a fairly short statement. It does, of course, prevent Mr. Humphreys from asking any questions, which, of course, is not perfect, but we would ask that he at least be given that opportunity to have his evidence presented.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Morehouse asked me if I minded. I completely understand if Mr. Williams is concerned and have no problem with that, and that's fine.
Okay, I mean, there is the opportunity of Teams to Mr. Williams if he wanted, but if he's happy for the statement to be read, then I'm happy to proceed.
I've been told that's been discussed, and it's preferable, if it's at all possible, if we can just read it.
Okay, yeah, no, that's
Thank
absolutely
you.
fine then. Okay, thank you.
Statement on behalf of Dafford, Cllr and Williams. I live at Ringland Top, a housing development situated on a large hill ringed by a semi-ancient woodland which has panoramic views over the Gwent levels and across the Bristol Channel to England. The central public open space at the pinnacle of the hill has been designated a Queen Elizabeth II playing field, one of only two in Newport. The surrounding Ringland Wood is designated as a SINC site and home to endangered species of birds, butterflies and mammals. The Ringland Ward has a population of 8,351 people. There are 3 infant junior schools and 1 high school in the area. During the operation of Bristol Airport, my house is directly beneath the approach path of the aircraft that are landing. In the peak of the summer holiday months, aircraft are coming into land every 5 to 10 minutes. The noise from these aircraft is extremely loud and intrusive. When the aircraft begin their descent, there is a very loud whistling noise, which I can only describe similar to that when you blow over the neck of a Coke bottle. This is most pronounced from the EasyJet aircraft, which I have identified from their livery. It's as if you're being attacked by whistling bombs. The noise is particularly bad during the summer months when EasyJet aircraft are returning from holiday destinations in Europe and correlates to their arrival times at Bristol Airport around the top of the hour from 6 p.m. to after 10 p.m. The noise in the evening is loud enough to disturb my sleep. I have used a noise meter in my garden during one of these jets landing in the summer evening and obtained a reading of 59 decibels, which is above the 59 decibel limit. Because of the aircraft's landing noise, I am not able to enjoy my garden and listen to birdsong from the adjacent woodland, which is 20 feet away. My house has more than the recommended depth of roof insulation and has the latest argon gas-filled double glazing with a 25mm gap between the panels, but I can still hear the noise of the aircraft approaching to land. I believe that Bristol Airport's expansion planning application is deficient and should be rejected as they have not taken into account the noise pollution and its impacts on residents in my area of Wales. I believe that the proposed expansion of Bristol Airport would have a detrimental environmental impact on the site of Ringland Wood and its flora and fauna under the Town and Country Planning Act regulations due to noise disturbance and air pollution. No environmental impact assessment for the area has been undertaken in contravention of the Town and Country Planning Act Environmental Impact Assessment England and Wales regulations. No strategic noise map or formulation of a noise action plan for England area has been included to manage noise issues, which is in contravention of the environmental noise regulations as amended. I am unable to enjoy my garden and listen to birdsong or the radio when these aircraft are landing. I believe this noise nuisance is prejudicial to my health, and if night flights are allowed to the sleep disturbance, will lead to health issues which are well documented, such as hypertension. I believe this is a statutory noise nuisance under the Environmental Protection Act. Bristol Airport are allowing its operators, such as EasyJet, to fly planes such as the Airbus A320 that have designed a flaw regarding the vent holes in the fuel tanks. When these When landing, these holes are causing the loud whistling noise. EasyJet promised to retrofit vortex generators to all its A320 fleet to reduce the noise by 2018, but the noise coming from the aircraft flying from Bristol Airport during 2019, this has not been done. The Civil Aviation Authority guidelines state that only the most modern, quiet aircraft should be used by airport operators. The use of these unmodified jets contravenes these guidelines. The current landing path is passed over a densely populated area. The Civil Aviation Authority states that noise preferential routes should avoid the overflight of built-up areas where possible. With the huge expanse of the Bristol Channel to the southwest of the airport, why are aircraft not approaching from that direction to land? Bristol Airport are responsible for the MPR, and their application should include a rerouting of the MPR to avoid the overflight of the built-up residential area of the east of Newport, as outlined in the CAA guidelines, especially as this application includes nighttime flights. I urge the Planning Committee to consider my objections on behalf of my residents in the areas of Rails to reject the expansion of the airport and operation of night flights.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Mr. Williams if he's watching us on live stream as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The next...
Madam,
sorry, Mr. Humphreys.
Because obviously I can't ask Mr. Williams questions, would you unusually just permit me to make 2 or 3 comments, in effect, relating to some of the things I would have asked him? If you don't think it's appropriate, then absolutely fine, but I'm accommodating Mr. Williams.
The only word that occurred to me was evidence, and I was wondering if it was better to come from one of your witnesses, perhaps.
Yes, we could certainly do that, although I don't know, as we'll get to that in several weeks, whether we will all remember, but I'm perfectly happy to do that.
Very conscious of the time period involved, but might be better if you can just refer us back with one of your witnesses to that statement, and we can hear that as a matter of evidence.
It's a perfectly fair point. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The next witness on the schedule is Councillor Sarah Warren. Thank you. Councillor Warren, you have come here to provide assistance to the inquiry as a representative from Bath and North East Somerset.
Yes.
Just if you could, I think when you made your statement, you described yourself as the councillor for Bath Avon North Ward,
yes,
and the cabinet member for Climate Emergency and Neighbourhood Services. Is that still your role, or have you occupy a different role now?
I'm now Deputy Leader responsible for Climate Emergency and Sustainable Transport.
Thank you.
So can you speak into the microphone? We're struggling to hear at this end of the room. We're a long way away. So
I'm now Deputy Leader
yes,
with responsibility for Climate Emergency and Sustainable Transport.
Okay,
thank you. Now, it may be that the inquiry is aware, the Bath and North East Somerset geographical area that's covered, how close does it get to Bristol Airport?
So there's the village of Chew Magna and Chew Stoke are about 5 miles away, but obviously extends across to Bath, which must be 20 miles away perhaps.
Thank you. And so your assistance to the inquiry is essentially, because I think Bath Avon North Ward is in the Bath area.
Yes, I live east of Bath.
And so your assistance to the inquiry is in your capacity as a representative of the council area.
Yes.
I think your statement addressed a number of concerns that are covered, and the first being climate emergency.
Yes.
Do you want to just give a summary, please, of your principal concerns in relation to the climate emergency?
Yes, I mean, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report was quite clear that we mustn't exceed 1.5 degrees of global heating, that wouldn't be safe for civilization on Earth. And we know that aviation carbon emissions in Britain are increasing and are highly significant. And we know that up until now, they've not been counted in the UK's carbon emissions reporting, and that the Committee on Climate Change in December recommended that they should be included. So specifically, the Committee on Climate Change said there should be no net expansion of UK airport capacity unless the sector is on track to sufficiently outperform its net emissions trajectory and can accommodate the additional demand, which is in the policies document on page 162.
So in relation to airport expansion, do you think an expansion of the airports in accordance with that policy?
No, unless there's a reduction in capacity somewhere else in the UK, then we will see an increase in flights and an increase in carbon emissions resulting from aviation.
Turning then to the economic case, you wanted to make some submissions in relation to that.
Yes, so an economic case is made by the airport for expansion, which says it will bring income to the region and that it will create jobs. But my argument is that the economic impact, both regionally and nationally and internationally, is absolutely enormous, that there's lots of studies out there. For instance, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development report that I've quoted that said that in 2017, the economic losses incurred from weather-related disasters amounted to $337 billion US, and we can only expect that to increase. As you know, at the moment, there are massive heat waves in Canada, there are fires in Siberia and in North America, and there have been, just this last week, there's been a major flood in China and major flooding in Germany, and we can only expect this to continue to happen with increasing frequency.
So are you saying that effectively as part of the economic case, those costs ought to be factored into any decisions?
Yes, I am. And also in terms of the case for jobs, there are studies out there, such as the Institute for Public Policy Research, which have highlighted lots of industries which could create lots of jobs that would in fact be beneficial for the environment, not detrimental.
The moving, if we can, to transportation issues.
Yeah.
Is that something from the Bath and North East Somerset perspective that you'd like to comment on?
Yes. So people travelling to the airport from the east, the main route is cross-country through the villages. And so they experience the same impacts you've heard of from the other village parish councils. They experience large volumes of traffic, a lot of taxi traffic at night, shining lights into bedrooms and waking people up. These are all small villages like the ones you've heard from, with narrow roads, children walking to school along lanes and things. And so they experience the same things you've heard about. But even as far as Bath, some of my colleagues and their residents complain of being disturbed by aircraft noise. And there's also the issue of the bus route. There is a bus from Bath which travels via Keynsham and Bristol, and people experience parking. So people go and park for the airport bus in Keynsham and places like that and leave their car there for some weeks.
And you've indicated that people travel from sort of the Bath area across and through villages.
Yes.
Is there a reason why they don't go, well, what are the other viable routes to get to the airport if you didn't do that? Okay, so I live east of Bath. If I was travelling to the airport, my most direct route would be to go across Bath and through Chew Magna. I could go across Bath and through Bristol and round the Ring Road and south, but the traffic would be very significant. I could go north to the M4 and west along the M4 and down the M5 and then come across to the airport from that way. But again, I would think that that section from the M5 is a very large mileage, and that section from the M5 across the airport I would expect to be quite slow. So I would almost always choose the direct route through Chew Magna. Thank you. And I think you reached some conclusions in the statement that you've made. Do you want to just set those out?
Sure. It's very clear that the adverse environmental impacts of the proposed development outweigh its benefits. Taking all new and developing evidence into account, it's even more relevant now than when Bath and North East Somerset Council voted to oppose the airport's expansion in March 2019 that this application is rejected. It's clear that the climate emergency impacts of the expansion have been underestimated in the application and must be given more weight in planning than the claimed economic benefits, which are at best speculative and are also outweighed by the enormous economic costs of the climate impacts. I would agree with the conclusions of the New Economics Foundation that the currently active airport planning applications should be determined at national level. That means all the ones that have been going on this year nationally. And I would support the Committee on Climate Change's assumption that there should be no net expansion of airport capacity and its observation that a more robust evidence base on the full climate change impacts of aviation is needed. And additionally, the lack of mass transit or a satisfactory surface transport plan for travellers from the east makes the highway's impact on villages in Bath and North East Somerset unacceptable.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be some questions for you.
Thank you. Mr. Humphreys?
Again, Councillor Warren, you happy to answer some questions?
Yes.
Okay. You tell us that you're a Baines councillor, and Mr. Morehouse put it, I don't mean intentionally, but just slightly ambiguously when he put it to you that you were a representative of the council area. Are you here on behalf of the council? Has your proof of evidence gone to the council and in some way been endorsed?
This proof of evidence itself has not been endorsed, but there are at the full council meeting in March 2019, at which the council declared a climate emergency, there was an amendment to that declaration motion which specifically stated that the council would oppose the expansion of Bristol Airport. So I'm here in that capacity.
So Bath and North East Somerset, you are representing the council today. If I was to go back and look through resolutions, you're representing the council.
Yes, go to the March 2019 full council meeting. You will see a motion that opposes Bristol Airport expansion.
Now, the declaration of a climate emergency, I make no criticism of this, but that's a political declaration, isn't it? It's not a legal declaration. There is no legal concept known as declaration of climate emergency.
No. No, although the UK has now, I believe, declared a climate emergency and has set out a deadline for net zero.
Well, that's slightly different. That's the Climate Change Act. You're absolutely right. Parliament too has perfectly properly, make no criticism of it, but just want to make sure that the inspectors understand the status, has declared a climate emergency. That's a political statement. And for your council, that's a political statement that you're concerned about the climate.
Yes, and that we intend to take action to reduce our emissions insofar as national law permits us to.
And you say that that is a material consideration in this appeal. So what you're saying is that Bath and North East Somerset, so the adjoining councils' commitment in relation to the climate is a material consideration.
Well, North Somerset has also declared a climate emergency.
That's not answering my question. Do you remember what the inspectors said? Try and see if you can start with yes or no, and then qualify.
Yes, it should be material. The National Planning Policy Framework has a presumption in favour of sustainable development, which it defines as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations to meet their own needs. Bristol Airport's expansion will compromise the needs of future generations to meet their own needs.
That's your evidence, obviously. But does your declaration of a climate emergency add anything or go beyond what is in the Climate Change Act, the legal commitment to net zero by 2050?
Yes, because we have committed to achieve net zero by 2030. And the reason for that date is because that's the date that's been identified in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report as being the date they recommend achieving net zero in order that the globe doesn't exceed 1.5 degrees of warming.
What did the United Nations decide, you know, within the context of the Climate Change Framework Convention, what did it decide at Kyoto in relation to international aviation?
Which was, what date was Kyoto? I
Kyoto
don't
was
know.
back
I don't
in-
know.
Okay. What it decided was, so this is the very body you're telling me about, that international aviation was not to be included within individual nations' climate budgets. I can't remember what article it is. We've got it in the thing. It's either Article 2 or 3 or 4. And Paris goes along with that. So according to the UN itself, international aviation is not to be included within these national accounts. It's to be dealt with through the International Civil Aviation Authority. Yes?
If you say so. The Committee on Climate Change has recommended a different approach.
Of course, that's because the UK government is going beyond what the UN has required. It's set an earlier target, and it has now included international aviation. That's why I asked you if your council, if the Climate Change Act and what the government is doing, in effect, reflects the standards that we have to meet. You said no. Your council's gone beyond that because of the Intergovernmental Committee, and I'm just trying to understand that. I don't think it has it?
In what sense?
In what sense do you say that that the UK commitment within the Climate Change Act is not consistent with Kyoto, Paris, and everything else, all the other international conventions?
So we need to reduce carbon emissions across the board,
No,
including
in
aviation.
what way do you say the UK Act is not consistent with those? Do you point to anything? Maybe you don't.
I think I don't know enough detail to be able to answer in that level of detail.
Councillor Warren, I wouldn't normally ask a witness like this, but because you told us you were the council's responsible body, I assumed you would. But I'm sorry if I'm asking you things that you don't feel comfortable with. Well, look, let's just move on then to a slightly different aspect of this. You set out the position of the CCC, and you say the CCC, the UK's Committee on Climate Change, assumed that the expansion allowed for, without any net increase in UK airport capacity. Of course, the CCC, in its, say, the carbon budget report, didn't say, did it, that there shouldn't be an expansion of aviation, i.e. numbers of flights?
They said there should be no net expansion of UK airport capacity unless the sector is on track to sufficiently outperform its net emissions trajectory and can accommodate the additional demand.
I know what they did say. Just ask you what they didn't say. They didn't say that there should not be an expansion of UK aviation. The balanced pathway is consistent with a 25% increase in flights.
Yes, but it depends on unproven technology.
You seem to pray in aid the CCC and then criticise the CCC. Just to understand, obviously the CCC is a very important body, but it's an advisory body, isn't it? It doesn't set policy. Government sets policy.
True, and it advises government.
Exactly, and the government then either takes that advice or rejects that advice or uses the advice in different ways. Now, the government strategy reflected in in our evidence on this, the government strategy is set out in decarbonising transport, looks to deal with the carbon effects of domestic and international aviation through a combination of the UK emission trading scheme and Cllr and budgets, whereas what you say is that there should be a moratorium on all UK airport expansion.
Well, until it can be decided at national level to ensure that we, ensure that we don't increase emissions.
Yes. But if you have, for aviation, emission trading scheme where airlines are given allowances of how much carbon they can use, that will ensure that there is no increase beyond the overall budgets. The airlines would just simply not be able to fly unless they had either reduced their own impacts to comply with their allowances or had bought allowances from other users, such as energy users.
Aviation emissions are high, and they're an increasing proportion at a time when we need to reduce our
I know that. That is not what I asked you about.
Repeat the question.
Okay. What I asked you about was the UK's emission trading scheme will give allowances to airlines, and not just airlines, other large energy users such as large carbon producers such as energy companies, and they will have to live within those. So the ETS works if you exceed a limit in 1 year, it's deducted from your allowances, for example, in a following year. Now, in that context, I don't understand why you say that international aviation will exceed what is necessary for the UK to achieve its climate change target.
Well,
just don't understand it.
The UK itself has now committed to reduce emissions very substantially. If aviation doesn't, if it's set an allowance, well, unless it's a decreasing allowance, we'll come to the point where every other part of the UK is net zero, and aviation, is 100% of emissions.
Yes, but so long as the overall amount of carbon is consistent with our trajectory towards net zero, that's perfectly acceptable, isn't it?
I suppose so, although that would be neglecting the non-carbon warming impact of aviation.
Yes, and we know perfectly well, both at a national and international level, that those types of effects are very uncertain. So cirrus clouds, cumulative little clouds that come off the wingtips of aircraft, will typically last for a few hours. Now, those are important things, but there is no way, is there, at the moment, of taking those into account in a way that is consistent with policy. Policy doesn't tell us that we have to do that or how we should do that.
Perhaps it should.
I think the scientists and others are certainly looking at that type of thing. But I come to your point about there should be a moratorium on growth. Clearly some airports have capacity and other airports have less capacity. A moratorium on airport capacity would have some effect of causing, for example, people in Bath to drive to, say, Birmingham to take a flight, and therefore that would have no net benefit in terms of climate change. Indeed, it might do the opposite.
That's not true, because the carbon emissions associated with driving to Birmingham are much smaller than the carbon emissions of putting on additional flights and increasing the overall UK flight capacity.
But, Councillor Warren, if the flight is going, if the extra flights are going to go from Birmingham or Heathrow or Gatwick or somewhere else, the carbon from the flights will be the same. You're simply forcing people to travel further in order to take the flight.
No, that's not correct either. If you increase Bristol Airport capacity, in order to ensure the UK doesn't increase its overall number of flights, you would have to reduce capacity somewhere else.
So this isn't just, as I thought, as you said, a moratorium on all UK airport expansion. What you mean is, what you are driving at is you want no more flights from the UK.
Yeah. Well, a moratorium on increase in number of flights.
Yes. So, but this is important. So, just so that we get how extreme Bain's position is, it's not just that you shouldn't build more capacity. Your position is that you should stop additional flights anywhere in the UK.
I don't think that's, I mean, I don't, we just...
But is that your position?
I think we need to avoid, increasing carbon emissions from aviation.
Is that your position?
We need to avoid increasing carbon emissions from flights.
Is that your position?
Say it again, the words.
I had thought your position, which was a moratorium on all UK airport expansion, just meant not building more capacity. What you've clarified, helpfully, is that what you actually mean is that there should be no more flights in the UK. And I just asking you to clarify that that is your position.
I think the position is that there should be no, increase in carbon emissions arising from aviation.
All right, well, I think someone once told me you ask 3 times, if you don't get an answer, then you move on. But that is simply not government policy, is it?
No, but that doesn't help us in a climate emergency.
No, but we can agree, can't we? It's not government policy. So what you are urging, and to be fair, you're, I think, perfectly transparent about it, open about it, you don't accept government policy. You think it should be different.
Planning policy says...
Do you think government policy should be different on this from
yes,
what it is?
Yes, I do, but I also think that planning policy says that we must meet the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations to meet their own needs.
Yes, the Bunton Commission, statement is pretty familiar to everyone, I would have thought. I'm just trying to understand your position. Now, on economic benefits, what you say is that the climate emergency should be given better weight than economic benefits outlined in the application. Now, nearly all forms of development will have some carbon effect, so employment sides. Your council has a plan that has allocated employment sites. Is the consequence of that as a council you will be refusing planning permission for all employment sites because the climate emergency should be given greater weight than economic benefits outlined in the application? Or is it different when it's your development?
I'm not responsible for the council's planning policy.
But what is your position?
Repeat the question?
Your council has a plan which allocates employment land. That employment land will have a carbon effect. What your evidence says is BANES, i.e. the council, contends that the climate emergency should be given greater weight than the economic benefits outlined in the application. What I'm asking you to just confirm to me, does that also include greater weight than the economic benefits of all the employment and indeed housing allocations in your own plan?
No, I think that in the case of the airport, the employment benefits will be small and the environmental costs will be very great. And
so you draw the balance differently in relation to your own development than the airport's development?
We're not planning an airport.
Do you know, I know that.
So I think the carbon costs, carbon impact of any development we might make in Bath and North East Somerset will not be in comparison to the expansion of an airport.
Final point, just in relation to surface transport, you say the mode share of public transport is falling at the airport. I just don't understand that. On what is that based?
I'm sorry, I don't have the reference, but I had some data. I'm sorry, I've not included that reference.
Okay.
There was, in fact, I can't think which report it was. There was a report which compared, it was probably the New Economics Foundation, but I'm not sure, that compared the land transport, the proportion of people arriving by car at different airports in the UK, and Bristol was lowest.
Yes, but that's...
I'll find out.
That's a comparison between airports. The point you are making is a temporal one.
Oh, yeah.
It is falling over time. It's not falling over time, is it?
Oh, that's what I found in the report that I found, but I'll have to go and look it up.
All right. Look, thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you. Councillor Warren, I think Bath and North East Somerset's Council's declaration of a climate emergency was described, I may be being unfair to my learned friend, but I think he used the word extreme at one point in his language or questions.
No, that is being unfair. I didn't say that the declaration was extreme. I was suggesting that the position that Councillor Warren was taking was extreme. I think I discussed the declaration much, much earlier in the cross-examination.
Okay, so I think that then the suggestion that your position in relation to increased carbon emissions has been described as extreme. I hope that's now a fair reflection of what was put to you.
Well, the point that I was putting was extreme, related to those questions around stopping all additional flights in the UK. And then I went on to ask whether that was consistent with government policy.
And I think in relation to government policy and the context of what was said to be an extreme view of yours, are you aware, as someone who, as you've been asked about the development of Bath and North East Somerset's plans, are you aware of any easy gains from the point of view of carbon dioxide reduction outside of aviation?
So ways we could reduce carbon emissions?
It's being suggested effectively, it was suggested to you that your view is extreme because there should be a moratorium on increasing carbon dioxide emissions from flights, and it was suggested that other parts of the economy would make that up the deficiencies. Are you aware of these other easy gains on the carbon dioxide point of view?
Well, I'm aware of opportunities to reduce carbon emissions, but I would say from my 2 years' experience in my current role that they're all very difficult. None of them are very easy. So, for example, we can increase energy efficiency of buildings, but that's a very difficult thing. We don't really have a retrofit industry yet set up in the UK, and it's not really being supported enough by government at present. So that's a very difficult thing, certainly for a council to influence. Surface transport emissions, certainly in Bath and North East Somerset, have not been reducing, and that's a very difficult one to do as well. So there may be some easy opportunities, but most of the opportunities to reduce carbon emissions significantly enough to allow aviation to continue expanding are all very, very difficult.
And another suggestion has been made that somehow there will be technological advances. I'm putting a time frame on it. 2030 is a date that is significant in the climate calendar, if I can put it that way, as recognised by everyone in their speeches so far to the inquiry. Are you aware, here we are in 2021, halfway through it, are you aware in the next 8.5 years of any forthcoming technological solutions to climate change?
So I'm not an aviation expert, but it seems unlikely to me. I mean, one of the proposals that people sometimes make is biofuels, and we'll have the problem that, you know, we need the agricultural land in the country to grow food on. And so if we turn it all over to biofuels, or substantial parts of it in order to create aviation fuel, then, you know, what will we eat? And other sources, I don't know, I think people have spoken of electric and hydrogen planes, but it's not my sense, without being an expert in the field, that any of those are very close.
And just going back to the extreme observation about your point of view, are you aware of the impact of global warming on, for example, sea levels in this part of the world, and what will happen to this part of the world should global warming continue at the anticipated rate?
Sea levels will increase. I don't have off the top of my head the figures of how many metres in how many years, but certainly places like the Somerset levels will be facing some problems.
Thank you. I've no further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's 1:15. I'm keen to. We've got 3 more of your witnesses.
Yes.
I think maybe do the next couple and then we'll take stock.
Thank you.
Okay.
The next witness is Kay Wooler, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, I think, if I'm right, you've asked if you can read your statement out as you wrote it. Is that all right?
Yes, please, yes.
I'm sorry to do it this way, but it'll be perhaps a lot quicker than trying to digest it. It's not that long a statement.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
Right, do you want me to give it now?
Could you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We, and by that I mean my husband and I, are against Bristol Airport's appeal proposals and fully support North Somerset Council's reasons for rejecting the airport's application to expand.
Can you speak up a little bit closer to the microphone, please? Thank you.
Sorry, there is a knack with them, but...
Yeah. Is that any better?
That's better, thank you.
We've lived in Felton, sorry, this is a personal impact statement. We've lived in Felton for almost 50 years. Our children were born here, attended local schools. Our younger daughter was married in St Catherine's Church and our older daughter is buried in the churchyard, as are other family members. We do not wish to be forced out of the village through indiscriminate expansion of the airport. Bristol Airport has been allowed to expand far beyond its natural boundaries and is quite simply in the wrong place. It is not the good neighbour it purports to be. Access to Bristol Airport is poor, and securing major changes would be exceedingly disruptive and very expensive, and this is all in the name of profit. We are not totally against the airport, but feel it reached capacity for its location at about 5 million or fewer passenger movements per year, and this was in the years 2004-2005. And I'll just give you an example of how far the numbers have gone in recent years. At the turn of the century, year 2000, there was roughly 2.25 million passenger movements per year. In 2019, just before the pandemic, it had reached nearly 9 million. It was 8,009,064 plus. These are the airport's own figures and are more than 85% holiday traffic, outbound and inbound. And the impact on our lives has been horrendous and unacceptable. Profits are put before people. I will outline the impact on ourselves and local residents and further afield under the following headings. All refer to usual non-pandemic times: noise, pollution, night flights, traffic, parking, and other. The noise. Flights are constant throughout the day and night. In the summer, we cannot enjoy our garden. Noise from parked aircraft is intrusive. Planes are parked right up to the airport entrance on the A38. A wooden bund is supposed to suppress the noise, but although the airports state that it complies with acceptable standards, it does very little to mitigate the sound and is no competition for jet engines. I'm reliably informed that the runway has been moved 20 degrees towards the village, and certainly the takeoff and landing aircraft are nearer to Felton village. A pilot who flies regularly to and from the airport has advised me that his aircraft are barely at 1,000 feet when flying over Felton. The noise as they thunder overhead is ear-splitting. Whilst newer aircraft may become less noisy in the future, that is not the current situation. and there is no such thing as a quiet aircraft. Pollution. The stench of aviation fuel pollutes the air, and black smuts on garden foliage are usual. Light pollution from the airport over a quarter of a mile away is excessive. It's like having a city on the doorstep. We do not need a light when using the bathroom at night, and the light pollution is evident from Mendip, which is an area of outstanding natural beauty. Exhaust fumes from through traffic from beyond Winford is very obvious. Much of this is airport bound. Whilst it is a great threat to everyone's health, it is a greater issue for children, both at Winford Primary School and especially when going to and from the school along the High Street. The airport itself uses caterers based at the former Winford Cattle Market. They use huge, unwieldy lorries that are very polluting. Exhaust fumes are evident as they lumber through Winford Village. These are serious environmental issues which have not been addressed and are directly related to the airport's activities. Winford itself is a single-use lane and it cannot cope with any increase. Night flights. These are one of the most stressful aspects of the airport's activities. Unrestricted night flights would seriously ruin our lives due to lack of sleep. Currently, in non-pandemic times, night flights are restricted between 11 and 6 a.m. There are some flights during those times due to the quota system. This only applies to departures. Arrivals are unrestricted, and although not as noisy as takeoffs, they are lower and loud enough to disturb sleep. 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. is only 7 hours. Most people usually go to bed about 7:30 and get up between 7 and 7:30. This is impossible as departures from 6 a.m. are constant and can be as many as 20 an hour in the summer months. And that for the airport is March to October. We cannot even hear the radio. If night flights were to be unrestricted, many would find it so stressful they'd be forced to move against their will. We have to sleep with our bedroom windows closed even on a very warm night when we need to run a fan, and which in itself is not quiet. We replaced our double-glazed windows with those of a higher acoustic deadening properties at a 25% greater expense than traditional double glazing. Whilst the noise levels are slightly lower when the windows are closed, it obviously makes no difference when they are open. Traffic. Felton is a small village. It's mainly set back from the through route from Winford towards the airport. Since the last expansion of the airport, the village has been increasingly used as a rat run for commuters. Evidence is mainly used in the rush hour, and I personally witnessed over 30 vehicles in a 15-minute time frame. They drive past the school pickup points, often at speed, creating a safety hazard for the children. Airport servicing traffic plus passengers from east of Chew Magna have greatly increased as the airport numbers have increased. Parking. There are several strands to this. Unauthorised and illegal parking by the Park on My Drive type businesses. There are 2 such endeavours in our lane of 11 properties. Vehicles arrive and depart at all hours. Many then take a taxi to and from the airport. The vehicles are then moved to another site, freeing space up for the next customers. Whether the passengers are aware of this is unknown. Both passengers and business owners can be very noisy and often block the lane during changeovers. In recent years, there's been an increasing amount of cars parked, dumped in several villages surrounding the airport by those going on holiday. Felton and Winford have had their fair share of this antisocial, opportunist parking. Together with our neighbours, we have been obliged to put up a series of no parking signs as a deterrent on the privately owned laybys outside our properties. When challenged, some passengers can be very abusive. Taxis and others park on the small parking area by St Catherine's Church while awaiting their passengers, in contravention of very prominently displayed signs prohibiting airport parking. They dump their rubbish in the parking area and use the graveyard as a lavatory. Those with relatives buried in the churchyard cannot easily visit their loved ones due to the lack of parking spaces, which can be very distressing. The application by the airport to compulsory perch land and part of Felton Common in order to create a roundabout is disgraceful, and it will not significantly improve the access to the airport. Bristol Airport is owned and operated by a financially motivated Canadian pension fund. Its activities have no impact on these owners. The airport remains in Greenbelt, but they have still abused this by creating car parking and a white elephant multi-storey building near the second roundabout, which is not required by them and is rented out. We are paying a very high price for all the activities associated with Bristol Airport. Felton is nearer to the point of roll than any other UK airport. It transpired at the last public inquiry regarding expansion that if the runway at Gatwick Airport was superimposed at Bristol Airport, Felton would be in the middle of the runway. Any further expansion will lead to the whole village having to be bought out at bucket shop prices, as it would be impossible to live here with any quality of life. Both Cardiff and Exeter airports have capacity. Nearly 30% of passengers using Bristol are from Wales, and at least 12% are from Devon and Cornwall. Both of these airports have much better access. With regard to Bristol Airport, enough is enough. Please respect the informed and considered decision made by North Somerset Council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Humphreys.
No, Ms. Muller, thank you very much, but no, I haven't got any questions for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The next witness is Abby Williams. Good afternoon. You've provided a proof of evidence to the inquiry. I think you're another person who lives in the village of Felton.
I think your
again,
microphone
you
might
need
be
to-
off. If you can switch it.
I'm just going to press that button and hope
That's
that
it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Now, I think you can also speak to some of the detrimental effects of living in that area. Can you help the inquiry with your own personal experience, please?
Yeah, so some of the things have been repeated, and I'm conscious that they might sound really trivial, but actually it impacts on our lives in many ways every single day. I've mentioned at the beginning of my statement that I've lived in Felton all my life, and I always thought it was quite a positive thing to live near the airport. We're talking sort of 10 years ago, and over the last 10 years it has just encroached on our quality of life more and more, and it's a nightmare now. It's gone from being a very positive experience. I was proud of Bristol Airport and very happy to live near it, and now we're choosing to move away. We can't live here anymore.
And overall, that's because of what? What are the key impacts on your life there?
So there's the noise, the aircraft noise. We can't sit in the garden. Working from home has been really difficult because every time an aircraft passes overhead, I have to mute myself. So mid-sentence, I just cut off multiple times in a Teams call. We can't sleep with our windows open. I sleep with earplugs every single night purely because of the aircraft noise, because it starts very early in the morning, it goes on till late at night. I know that they're not supposed to, well, they're supposed to have fewer flights between 11 and 6, but that often doesn't seem the case. And of course...
Would it concern you if flights were permitted, unrestricted, and able to be throughout the night?
Absolutely. I don't know how I'd have a good night's sleep, again, if it increases. I mean, it's most nights at the moment, and as you say, I sleep with earplugs and I can still hear it.
What about road traffic movements in the village?
The amount of vehicles going through the village has just increased exponentially over the last few years. As I say in my statement, there are lanes I won't walk down anymore because it's just too dangerous with cars careering around. Neighbours have had their cats killed. We won't let our cats out. And again, that sounds really trivial, but we can't let our animals out like they should be able to because it's just too dangerous. And we've got the taxis, they're the worst. Drivers most of the time. They park in people's driveways, they defecate in people's driveways, and then we have the airport parking has been awful in the last few years, and understandably the villagers, some villagers are very angry about this, and whilst I don't condone it, they do damage the cars.
And that's just an example of how frustrated people are. And as I mentioned in my statement, outside our driveway, it's been blocked lots of times by airport parkers. They just dump their car and leave them for sometimes weeks at a time, and we can't get out of our driveway. And one of these cars was damaged by somebody, I don't know who, it certainly wasn't us. And then a few weeks later, mine and my partner's car windscreens were smashed, and we assume it was retribution for them assuming that because it was outside our house, it was us that damaged their car.
That's what you're living with today, well, I say today, normally, when pre-COVID, I suppose.
Yes, it's not over-dramatic to say it impacts on our everyday life.
Proposal to significantly increase the number of people going to Bristol Airport, how do you think that's going to, what sort of results do you think that's going to involve for you?
I don't see that it's going to get better, it's just going to get significantly worse in all aspects. As I say, to the point where we were looking to buy a house in the area we're currently living with my parents, and we're now not looking at this area, just the mere threat that the airport is going to get the go-ahead.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Ms. Williams. Thank you very much. No questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
There's one witness left, Scarlett Vester, whose
Yeah.
proof is 1 page. Thank you.
Yeah, let's go.
Thank you. You're Scarlett Vester, and
Yes.
you've also provided a proof of evidence to the inquiry.
Yes.
In relation to your connection to Bristol Airport and this area, can you just help with the inquiry with what that is, please?
I live in Buckham, which is near Felton, and near the airport, of course, and it does have a strong presence, and every time we go to Bristol, we pass it, and we can hear the planes. Not as much as the people in Felton, but it is impactful, certainly. And I agree with everything the witnesses have said so far, but for me, my biggest reason for being here is the impact on climate change and how devastating it would be for its contribution to climate chaos.
Thank you. And just so that we understand what it is that concerns you about climate change and the impacts of it, what do you envisage happening?
The increase in carbon emissions, aviation emissions, would have all the impacts that we're seeing now of on weather and decreased housing, and I've said in my statement it would be symbolic, and I think that's true. I think now is the time to be making the policies that will help and not allowing unsustainable growth and expansion.
Now, you've mentioned unsustainable growth. Do you, from your perspective, see the expansion of Bristol Airport with what you've told us to be sustainable?
No. If I thought the growth was sustainable, I wouldn't be here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Humphreys.
Once again, thank you very much. I haven't got any questions. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, that's all of your witnesses for this session, certainly anyway. I know you've got some technical witnesses in the topic-based session. So thank you for that this morning. Thank you, everyone. It's been a productive morning. So if we break now, it's just gone 1 o'clock. If we come back at 2, please. And then we have some more interested parties this afternoon. Okay. Oh, yes, just a point to mention as well. The room here tonight is required for a council committee meeting, so we'll be having a 4 o'clock finish. Looking at where we are in the schedule, we should have a fairly steady afternoon. I don't know whether the programme officers managed to contact any other interested parties to perhaps bring them forward, but we'll review later on anyway. Okay.